also witnessing what Representative Landon has alluded to over the past years regarding our efforts to fund it. I don't think that at this time adding additional funding sources will ever happen. And so, and I agree with my good colleague from Casper here that we need to fund this now. We need to have a stable source, and if it means diverting it from other sources, so be it. So I too I vote.
Other comments from the committee? Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, this certainly fits with the no new taxes mantra that we seem to have with some organizations. So maybe it is the best alternative to getting something done. At least we get something done. We're going to rob Peter to pay Paul, though.
Any other comments? Other comments? I'll make a quick one. Please solve this. Senator Landon and I have been are the two most long-serving members. And I remember my first term, this was a topic of discussion. Frankly, I'm tired of dealing with it. You don't know. Yeah, and that's the problem. We have not dealt with it. So committee, thank you. With no other comments? Question being called. Do we need the roll call on this?
No,
I don't think we need roll call on this. This is
It's just for draft.
okay. All of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Okay, motion carries. Ms. Jarvis, do you understand what we want? Okay, all right. And if you don't, Representative Brown will explain it several more times. Okay, with that, we're a few minutes behind schedule. Yes, we are. And that we were ahead of schedule. That's what WyoLink does to this committee. So just logistically, we will stop at 5:30. That is a hard time for me. There are people who need to get to other meetings tonight, to travel for meetings tomorrow. So even if we are not done with our work, we will stop at that point. And if you want to continue, we'll take the time out of lunch. Hope you all had a good breakfast. So with that, the next discussion is Director. We will discuss funding.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I believe my task here is a quick update for you on really the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that has just passed the Senate. And so I'll just keep these comments fairly brief. There's 2,700 pages. I haven't read them all yet. So, but I do
Director,
have
how many have you read?
less than that significantly. So the
Continue.
so we do know that it passed the U.S. Senate. The bill will now go to the U.S. House, where it is expected, but not certain to pass. So we'll stand by. But really the reality is we think it'll pass as pretty close to as written. Here's what the bill does for us in terms of WYDOT's top priorities and for our priorities in the state. One is it does a wonderful job of maintaining our formula share. And as we've discussed before, the formula is what's really critical to us in our state because we're what's called a recipient state. And we receive more fuel tax revenue back than we put in, and that's maintained. The funding is actually significantly higher than the FAST Act, and I'll get to some numbers just in a little bit. And the other nice thing about this bill is that it keeps the percentage about the same in terms of transportation dollars that go to roads and bridges, highways and bridges. And so because this is also the funding formula at the federal level for rail and boats and aeronautics and mass transit And so we always sort of look at the percentage of funding that goes to horizontal transportation in terms of highways and bridges. And so that's maintained. Right now, if it's enacted, the bill would provide about 1.8 billion, that's with a B, in formula funding to Wyoming over 5 years. Okay, so that's about 23% greater than the FAST Act. So about, and these are all rough, somewhere between 100 and 130 million dollars extra a year in funding in formula funding for us that comes. So that's great news for us on the federal funding side. The so what on the state side is we'd have to match it. So that's $13 million. Potentially they would have to come up in state money to match. And remember, state money is sort of where our issue is right now. So, and as you recall, we are not putting in for several grant opportunities because we don't have enough money to match it. So it is part of the discussion, is good news on the federal side, but we would have to think through, where our state money goes in terms of that match.
Senator Landon.
So Director, you alluded to about a 10% figure when you referenced the state funding. And I believe that's because, as you mentioned yesterday, a lot of that highway funding from the feds comes at 90-10. But there's other opportunities that come in to you at 75-25 and 60-40. And so would you think that we should consider a higher figure than 10% if we have in our minds what we need to come up with at the state level?
Director?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, I think that would be wise. So the formula funding, the match is 90-10. And so that's where I base the 13 million on. That's to match that. If we wanted to pursue additional grant options, then certainly that's available. State monies would have to go to that. And just as a reminder, as we fund the system, there's a lot of what we fund that we can't use federal money for. And that's where our state money goes. For example, when you looked at the rest areas that we looked at, that's all state funding. When you look at the maintenance that we do on our highways in terms from YDOT doing the maintenance and running our snow plows, that's all state funding. Federal government does not pay for the state to maintain our roads. They pay for construction projects. And that's a key difference there.
Director?
Thank you for that.
Quick question. So are you indicating that, I'm just going to pick the 100 million a year number, we would have to come up and appropriate 10 million to you to match that? Is that what you're indicating?
Mr. Chairman, that would be correct.
Okay.
Otherwise, I get to make that match, we'd have to pull $10 million from somewhere else. So there's only so much state money that's available.
Okay, thank you. Please continue.
The bill also adds a significant amount of money for there's some set asides for bridges, and that would be in addition to that. So that would be helpful. And in terms of airports, transit, safety, broadband, and electrical vehicle charging stations, that's all included in there, which you would sort of think of as the current federal administration's priorities. And so just a couple numbers there. In terms of broadband, about $100 million over 5 years is what we would anticipate. In terms of aeronautics, about $72 million over 5 years. And in terms of electrical vehicle charging stations, about 27 million over 5 years. We'll talk some EV later today. So those numbers, that's actually some really helpful numbers, again, in terms of money coming from the federal government. All of the exact details on match requirements and no match requirements on those are unknown. There is a move afoot to make that 100% money. So that would be helpful. So more to follow there, and we'll see what the final bill looks like. The bill does not currently provide a long-term solution for stabilizing the highway trust fund. So, as we deal with, funding issues at the state, so do we at the federal level. And we haven't raised the federal fuel tax like since 1996. And so every year, the federal government has to dip into general funds to fund the highway trust fund. And there's no solution. However, they do include a couple research programs and pilots to study alternatives to the fuel tax. And there is actually a federal pilot to study a vehicle mileage tax. And so we'll see how that comes out and how that is sent out to the states. There are lots of specific details that we don't know yet, and we won't know until we have a final bill. But we'll continue monitoring the programs and really the discretionary funding programs with great interest, and really, ensure that we can leverage the federal dollars to the maximum extent that we can. And Mr. Chairman, that's a quick update on really the federal fund.
Senator Landon.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Director, do you have any sense from your communication network out there when, if at all, that bill would be turned loose and passed? Is there any danger that it'll get put in a drawer back there?
Director?
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chairman, I don't think it'll be put in a drawer. It's a priority of the administration, and really we need to fund, this infrastructure funding is important across the nation. My sense, and this is only a sense, I certainly don't have a crystal ball. I don't think it will pass this fiscal year. I think it will be next year. We'll see with recesses planned and other discussions on the line. That's my unscientific guess, and please don't hold me to it.
Thank you.
Other questions? Or Senator McCune?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I've read some of this, I want to get your opinion on pages 509 through 514, which actually is going to introduce a federal road usage charge, higher federal gas taxes at some point in time, and I'm going to keep reading through it. There seems to be a lot of strings attached to this. So it's kind of like the horse with the carrot and the whip. And I'm just wondering how you interpret some of that, if you've seen it.
Director?
Mr. Chairman and Senator McCune, I'm not sure that I've read 509 to 514. So my understanding, there's always strings attached on the federal money. Right. I mean, there just always is. I mean, look at some of the discussions we had yesterday about, repeat offender laws and things like that. So it's out there. We'll work with that system and see where it goes. And that's probably the best answer I could give you at this point.
Follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just hope when we look at this time, some of the federal funding we've taken with the strings actually ended up costing the state more money than we got from the federal government. And we can talk offline on some of that in the education areas. I just hope we don't go after federal funds and risk the prosperity of the state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any other questions? No other questions? So Director, thank you for your presentation. Hang with us. You'll probably be back up here.
Yes, sir.
Okay. With that, let's see. Next on the agenda is the draft fuel tax bill. So, Ms. Jarvis.
Mr. Chairman, I wondered if there's, I don't know about the order, it's just the way they were added to the agenda. I mean, by me, I do know about the order. I don't, it's a surprise to me, but I didn't know if there was any chance that you wanted to ask Mr. Representative Overmuller for some of what he wanted to discuss before we got on to working bills. It's your preference. I know that you and he have spoken about that permanent mineral trust fund information.
Ms. Jarvis, thank you. Good reminder. So with that, we'll switch gears a little bit then, because I was wondering which order to take those in, because Representative Obermuller has an alternative funding idea concept, and you should have had that information in your packet. Representative, do you want to speak from there, or do you want to come to the hot seat? Looking at your fellow representatives, they want you in the hot seat.
Mr. Chairman, this is in the packet that was at everyone's seat when they arrived yesterday. It was not in the materials that were mailed.
Okay, thank you. So everyone have that?
Yep. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Jerry Overmuller, Representative House District 56. Today I have a bill draft ask. And it's asked, the ask is for a highway funding bill funded by severance taxes. And the question is, why severance taxes? And I have a handout that you all should see here that I had LSO draft up for this meeting. And what's on here is what I asked for them to do, which was to produce a history of the last 20 years of how the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund has been funded. So you see the years to 2001, 2021 is the last available information. And that's in column B is the running balance on a cost basis. These aren't the values in the marketplace. These are the cost basis, actual dollars that have flowed into the permanent mineral fund. And so the ending balance of 7.5 million is a cost basis number. I believe the actual value is closer to 8 billion. Column C is the constitutional piece of this. When the fund was set up, it was set up to be funded by 1.5% of the value of minerals. And so this is a calculated number. And you'll see the history of how this constitutional piece has funded the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund over these years. So the total of that has been 3,449,000,000 over these last 20 years. Columns D, E, and F are borrowing a metaphor from another legislator in another context. These are additional ornaments on the tree. These are things that the legislature has added over the years. And you will see that in column D, there was a period of time from 2006 to 2016 where an additional 1% severance tax, in addition to the 1.5% of the constitutional money, was added to the fund. In column E were the years in which there were direct appropriations to the fund. Column F, you'll see that those are spillbacks of money that exceeded the spending policy amounts. What happens there is money that is in excess of the spending policy goes into the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund reserve account. And as that reserve account grows, by statute, it hits a limit of what can be in that account, and the excess amounts then drop back into the permanent fund. So you can see that $601 million has tipped back in. Column G are adjustments that are made with capital gains and other adjustments on a cost basis. They aren't the actual capital gains, they're just how they affect the cost basis in the calculation. So when you look at the addition of all those columns, you can see in D, E, F, and G, the total in column H. You can see that over these years, over the last 20 years, we've added by directive from us, the legislative body, 2,477,000,000. Now I put in the column I is total severance taxes reported by Craig for the out of table 4 of the Craig report. And I draw your attention to years 2006 to 2016. And you see that period of time where you see the biggest grouping of the additional ornaments. And that started when severance taxes was $1 billion. And you can see that there in those years are those years in which we made tremendous amounts of money in severance taxes. Since that time, it's been dropping off for reasons that you all know. So where are we today? According to our current statutes, starting in 2021, column D is coming back to life. Column D, that 1% severance tax, half of that is going to come to this fund, and the other half is going to the Common School Permanent Land Fund. So we have decided as a body to save money again in a time when we have other competing needs. The highway program is one of those needs. Today, I don't think today is the appropriate time to discuss the merits of these comparative values of the permanent fund and our highway program. Today, what I would like to ask for is a draft bill that would move the severance taxes that are scheduled to go into these permanent funds, move that money to be allocated to the highway fund. And asking you for a look at that in a draft form, not asking you to agree with that today, but simply move the concept forward in bill form so that I can come back and then try to convince you that that's a good idea at our next meeting. Mr. Chairman, with that, I'd take any questions.
Questions for Representative Obermuller? Representative Brown.
Representative Overmiller, just out of curiosity, you're asking for a bill draft. Are you talking in perpetuity? Are you talking for a sunset date for this to end? Are you talking for something for, 5 legislatures down the road to figure out once we've established a better baseline? What are you looking for when these transitions would end?
The way this-
Representative
yeah. Oh, thank you, Mr.
Obermuller?
Chairman. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown. The idea for me is when you look at how it's been done in the past, future legislators are going to do what they want. So I would want the bill drafted as if it were in perpetuity until somebody does something different with it. I could see that if in a boom time, sometime in the future, that in a period of time we don't know anything about today, we could hit a boom again, and we would want to put money back into savings. The idea here is that this just isn't a great time to be saving more than what the Constitution requires. And I'm asking us to go back, return to a constitutional model for this fund for now, and subject to change in the future.
Real quick.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just real quickly, Representative, is it your idea that it would be the half of that 1% that is currently going to go back into the permanent mineral trust fund and the other half continue to go to the common school permanent fund? Or are you suggesting in this bill draft that we go with that entire 1% and send it to the highways?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going after the entire 1%.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions for Representative Obermuller? Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I really like the representative's idea of a bill draft and to look at this. We're not saying that we're doing it, but it might be a way to fund not just the WyoLink, but more for the highways also. So it seems like a rational idea that if you're having trouble with your budget, you don't put quite as much to savings as you used to when you had a lot of money. So I like the idea.
Other questions for Representative Obermuller? Representative, I have one then. About how much money are we currently talking about?
For the years, for the current biennium, the estimate is $128 million.
All right. And Representative, looking at those years where the money was not there, And that they were negative, ended up being negative amounts. How does that affect this concept?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure what you're referring to as the negative amounts.
That would be, let's see, column G and actually column H.
Mr. Chairman, if Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure that I know even what that negative adjustment is in column G. I suspect, though, that there's a piece of an increase in the value of the fund that actually, in the real world of the values of the fund, probably didn't take a hit. I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't know, Mr. Chairman, I don't know that the severance, the 1% was meant to cure some kind of negative position.
Ms. Jarvis?
If someone else could add to that.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Tempty from Legislative Service Office Budget and Fiscal does not have testimony to give. However, he may be able to answer the question that you just raised.
Okay, I will hold for just a minute on Mr. Tempty. If you would hold with us for just a second. So Representative, right now, approximately 25% of the state's budget's coming from our earnings on the PMTF. That's what we use to operate every year. How does this affect that operating money, considering that right now we're getting probably, if we're lucky, 2.3% on that, and inflation just this past week was listed at 5.4% annually. So we're going to start losing money, in effect, losing buying power out of the PMTF. How does this affect the ability of that fund to generate money, operating money for the state?
Mr. Chairman, it affects it by the return of that. Let's take the $128 million. So the return off of that at 1%, $12 million. I mean, that's 10%, 12. Well, I'm getting my fuzzy math here, being caught in the moment. But whatever the percentage is, would be on the $128 million. So you're looking at putting that money in at that level of return, which is very low, and comparing that to the leverage that you would get in the highway fund of 10 times to grab federal dollars, close to that to avoid opportunity cost of lack of maintenance on your roads, where you have to rebuild. So, I mean, the leverage to me in the highway fund is a greater leverage than we would get in the permanent funds.
All right.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, have you given any thought to a state trust fund for the highways? And would there be any pros to knowing that this could be a fund that would have peaks and valleys, and just something to think about? I don't
Mr.
know.
Chairman, I have given that some thought. in the last-
Representative Obermuller.
Mr. Chairman, I have given that some thought just in the last 24 hours. I think going forward, there could be a piece there of that, depending on how much of this money is generated and the needs of YDOT, the whole spending policy concept, and there may be something there.
Thanks for your thoughts, by the way. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. Thanks.
So Amanda, would you admit Mr. Tempty?
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. And it's been a while, so please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dean Tempty. I work in the budget fiscal section of the Legislative Service Office. I prepared this handout for Representative Obermuller, so I can go ahead and try to answer that question in regard to column G. The gains and losses in column G, what those can be best described as the net capital losses that take place within the corpus in tougher investment years, if you will. And you'll notice some of those amounts are gains as well. One thing I would point out specifically in column G, that column nets out to a negative $12,109,000. And you'll notice that that identical number shows up in fiscal year 2008. And the reason for that, I don't know if you all remember what fiscal year 2008 looked like, but that was a pretty tough investment time. That was the time of the Great Recession, and that was a time where the permanent trust fund corpus had experienced some capital losses. In response to what was taking place in that investment environment in fiscal year 2008, the state treasurer's office modified their policy a little bit, and that policy being they would net, beginning in fiscal year 2009, the treasurer's office began to net out their capital gains against capital losses within the corpus. And in those years where the gains exceeded the losses, that income would be distributed. In years where the losses would exceed the gains, those losses would be held over until they were offset by future gains. And that is why, like I said, this policy went into effect in fiscal year 2009, which means all the numbers in that column from fiscal year 2009 down net to zero, if you will. And that negative 12,109,000 is residing there because fiscal year 2008 was before that new policy went into effect.
Dean, thank you very much. I think that provided a great bit of insight into this. Any questions for Mr. Temte? Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Temte. And just some quick math, I think 2% of 128 million is about $2.5 million, I think is. But with regard to in column G again, where it's got the 118,886,938, which just incidentally adds up so that, again, the column comes to a zero. So is that an adjustment? Is that a book adjustment that was made after the recession? I just, that seems odd to me that number would net to zero. Thank you.
Mr. Temte, want to hazard an answer?
Mr. Chairman, yes, thank you. Fiscal year 2000, what this shows is that in fiscal year 2009 included the period of time where there were threats of banks failing, that the financial system was doing so badly. So fiscal year 2009 was a very tough time, and that was a time where in accordance with this policy that went into effect in fiscal year 2009, there were $118.9 million worth of capital losses that were carried forward. And you can see those two numbers below that in fiscal year 10 and fiscal year 11. That basically means those gains net against that loss in fiscal year 2009 to basically net against that 118 million. I don't know if I said that very well, but.
Any other questions for Mr. Temte? Not seeing any. Thanks, Dean, very, very much. Good to see you again. Okay, committee?
Question.
Mr. Chairman.
I think we need a
Oh,
motion and a second.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator.
I would make the motion that we draft a bill based on the recommendations of Representative Wolper so we can take a look at it.
Second.
Second.
Okay, all right.
Heather, you can pick which one you want to be the second on this one.
Mr.
Everybody's
Chairman, we
waiting
don't
on-
actually record seconds,
Okay.
so we're good.
All right, any,
Second then.
okay, any further
You
discussion?
got the first though, didn't you? Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you got the motion. Yeah,
Mr.
thanks a
Chairman,
lot.
yes, I got the motion from Co-Chairman Landon.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Question.
Okay,
Question.
no further discussion, question having been called. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Okay, Heather, you have that one down?
Mr. Chairman, I have no doubt that Representative Obermuller, that I will be asking him some questions along with Mr. Tempty, but yes, I have the request, bill draft request down.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One thing I will ask the committee on that, this is getting well into the state financials. Would it help the members of the committee who are not really versed in that? The co-chairman and I have served quite a bit on appropriations. We understand what is being discussed. Would a brief primer on this help the committee at some point in time?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll work on doing that. I'm not sure if we'll do it in November, or maybe we just have an informal Zoom meeting and get a primer on how we budget, what all these funds are, how they're calculated, what the so-called tips are. And that it's in your budget book, but that might not be very clear at times. So thank you. Okay. What's that?
It's a break time.
Okay, we can take a quick, before you said that, Ms. Jarvis, we can take a quick 5-minute break. We can kind of get back on schedule, so you actually do get lunch today. 5 minutes. I'll time it.
Okay.
You better run.
Go hard.
Let's go through the fuel tax bill. I think what I want to do is at least discuss it at this meeting. I don't know if we want to move it forward or think about it until November. So if you would, please, and that is 22 LSO 32.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. 22 LSO 0032, working draft 0.4 is a fuel tax bill. And what the bill does is it goes through and over the next 3 years, increases the fuel tax by an incremental amount each of those years. So on page 1 is just the title indicating that there's that the bill draft is increasing fuel taxes. And then it also amends distributions of fuel tax revenues. So as we move to page 2, in 39-17-104, it adjusts the taxation rate for the period beginning in July 1st, 2022, and then ending the year thereafter. It would adjust it up by 5 cents per gallon. And then for the next year, July 2023 through through June 30th, 2024, it would go up an additional 5 cents per gallon. And then thereafter, it would go up by an additional 5 cents. So that's the 39 cents from the current amount. And that language that you see there on lines 5 through 9 on page 2 is basically the incremental amount that is done for the gasoline tax, which is on page 2. And then it is done for, I'm not meaning to entirely jump around, but you'll note that the fuel taxes are designated that in 39-17-100s, that's the gasoline tax. The 39-17-200s, that's the diesel tax. And the 39-17-300s are the alternative fuels tax. So this language is repeated, or these increments are repeated in each of those sections. And that's the length of the bill. So rather than repeating entirely, or if it feels like I'm repeating myself as we go forward, I am, and that's why. So on page 3, the one different thing that happens in the gasoline tax is that you'll notice in subsection C at the top of page 3, paragraph 2, there is an amount that goes to for snowmobiles, and this amount is diverted from the fuel tax that is paid to go to a snowmobile account. And then you'll note on page 4, there's an amount that goes that is diverted from the fuel tax that goes for motorboats. And that's the amounts that you see there on page 4. And then you will note that on page 5 in paragraph 4, there is the amount that's adjusted accordingly for off-road vehicles. And then, okay, now we're at the bottom of page 5 after we've sent those diverted amounts for the motorboats and the off-road vehicles and the other thing, the other type of vehicle. Snowmobiles. Then at the bottom of page 4 in subsection D, we're beginning the same amount, or this reference to these diverted amounts to say that though these diverted amounts shall be distributed in the same ways, the same percentages that fuel taxes are distributed. So when you see that language of the 5 cents per gallon and the 5 cents per gallon, the 5 cents per gallon, and then the 10 cents per gallon, and then 15 cents per gallon by the 3rd year, that this amount shall be taken off before, I misspoke, before they're distributed the way regular fuel taxes are, instead to be expended on highway construction, repair, or maintenance, and not for administration or other operating expenses. So these 5, 10, and then 15 cents over the next 3 years are specifically designated for highway fund, yes, but for construction, repair, or maintenance. And that's at the bottom of page 5 to the top of page 6. So then on page 6 is where I promised that I'd be repeating, because now we are on the 39-19-204 sections or 200s section of the law. So here's those same increments to increase the diesel tax by those amounts. And then on page 7, you will see that change in the distribution where the 5, 10, and then 15 cents are expended or are to be expended on highway construction, repair, or maintenance. I'm at line 18 on page 7 to show you where I am. That they shall be expended for the highway construction, repair, or maintenance, and not for administration or operating expenses. And then we move to the third, at the very bottom of page 7, you'll note that we move to the title 39-13, -17-300s. So this is the alternative fuels. As we move on to page 8, where they are increased by the same increments for the alternative fuels. And that is page 8, and then page 9 goes to the distribution, where you'll see that same language in the distribution, that the 5, then 10, then 15 cents shall be starting at line 17 on page 9, expended on highway construction, repair, or maintenance, and not for administration or operating expenses. And that is the increase into fuel tax bill in its entirety.
Thank you, Ms. Jarvis. Any questions for Ms. Jarvis? Questions? Okay, none? Thank you. So committee, at the last meeting, we asked that this bill be drafted so that we could look at it. 5-cent increase in gasoline tax, 5-cent increase in diesel fuel tax over 3 years. So 15 cents in the end. However, with the concept to move Representative Obermuller's concept on the 1% statutory severance tax forward, I would like to hold this bill. I'll table it if that's okay with the committee until the November meeting so we can compare them side to side. However, I will take public comment on this bill. So with that, and there are no questions, I'll open public comment. Anyone in the audience here wish to speak on this bill? Okay, anyone virtually?
Mr. Chairman, we have Mr. Brett Moline.
Okay, please admit Mr. Moline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline again, Wyoming Farm Bureau. Of all the taxes to look at, this is probably the one that my members are most opposed to. Granted that like for diesel, what we use out in the fields doesn't have to pay the road tax, but any fuel that we do use on the roads we have to pay the fuel tax. And also any trucking that my members have to have done, that's going to increase the cost of production. Somebody much more astute than me said that agriculture is the only business that buys retail, sales, wholesale, and has to pay the freight both ways. So that's one of our reasons that we're adamantly opposed to the increase in fuel tax. It's been stated before that the last time we put fuel tax increase on the price of fuel, we increased the tax 10 cents a gallon. The price of fuel went up 2 cents a gallon. I think we also need to look at what the price of oil was doing at that time. If I recollect correctly, the price of oil was going down. Hence, the price of gasoline should have been going down. Gasoline is one business I cannot figure out how they price it anyway. When we have a station here in Laramie that is about 50 cents a gallon cheaper than all the other stations in town, it tells me somebody somewhere is making a lot of money if one station can sell it for 50 cents a gallon cheaper and still be making money. Anyway, with Mr. Chairman, again, just to express my opposition to the fuel tax increase on behalf of my Farm Bureau members, I would sit for any questions for the committee.
Committee, any questions for Mr. Moline? Any questions? No? Okay, thank you, Mr. Moline.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Larson? They're on constantly.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Mark Larson with the Wyoming Petroleum Marketers Association. After that last testimony, I could not sit in my chair very long. I need to point out to the committee that fuel prices this summer have been extraordinary. We have had the need for the governor to exact a hours of waiver service or service waiver for us to be able to meet the fuel supply needs of the 30% increase we saw this summer. I will say that I've said for the last 40 years that I've been in the business, the street sets the price. And ultimately, and while I'm kind of embargoed against from the Sherman Act of talking about prices outright, I will say that what we experienced this summer, I hope we don't have to experience again. Aviation, it's not over with the jet fuel, the Jet A and the avgas, but the price disparities we saw were based on replacement cost. And when we saw such volatility in the market, supply sources running out of fuel, going and waiting 4 hours at a line in order to try to be told that, oh, we don't have any premium left. We don't have any other fuel left. So we're going to Montana. We're going down to Colorado. We're going as far as Farmington, New Mexico in order to get product. So I understand what Mr. Moline was saying, and I understand that it's a very complex issue when you start looking at fuel pricing. And like I said, I've been in the business 40 years. I still don't know all of the complexities, but I think I know most of them. And this will change. You will see the prices start to stabilize when you see crude start to stabilize and you see the 30% demand and supply come back into shape. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Larson?
Thank you, committee.
Thank you. Ms. Lutkersky, please identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Katie Legursky with Associated General Contractors. Just wanted to remind the committee that our organization is supportive of an increase in the fuel tax. You heard yesterday during the tour, as well as earlier today from YDOT directly, that we are in a situation right now that we cannot apply for any additional funds, any additional grants at the federal level, because we do not have the state funds to match that. And this bill would go a long way in assisting that, regardless of what happens on the federal level with the current infrastructure plans that they're looking. We still need a funding mechanism for state dollars to assist us in going after grants and additional funding from the federal government. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Legursky? Representative Overmiller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question about the two bills that we're talking about with the 1% severance. Would that change your position on this one if that other bill passed? Are you in favor of both of them concurrently moving forward? Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Overmiller, I would definitely have to take that back to our board of directors. We would have a discussion going back and forth once we see the draft bill on the severance tax, and we'd be happy to discuss it at that time. And I'm sure several of our members will be reaching out to you as well for additional information.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Ms. Legursky? Any other questions? Okay. Thank you. Please have a seat. Identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Mark Corthell with Corthell Transportation out of Rock Springs. I just have one question on this bill. When we raise the sales tax within the state, affects mostly the local users. I'm a long haul trucking company, so in any state, then we always look at where we're going to buy our fuel the cheapest. And so then you have to rely on, if I fuel in Nebraska and drive all the way to Utah, the only state tax that you're going to get is off my miles on the Ifta. So I think a tax like this mainly affects the locals and the local people doing business here in Wyoming. So is there a provision in this bill to raise the Ifta tax so that we encompass all the users of our road, because our roads take a lot of beating because it's a national highway. It's a national interstate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
I'm Sheila Furch with the Wyoming Trucking Association. As you know from our past testimony on fuel tax increases, we're not opposed to a fuel tax increase. Our current policy is for a 6 cent per gallon increase phased in over 3 years. So I've notified my board that this is being discussed. We've not readjusted our position yet. We'll be talking about this at our September board meeting. So we certainly will have more information in November when you take this bill up again. So we'd be happy to talk about that again. And just in case Mr. Mueller has the same question for us, in the past, we have been supportive of using severance taxes to help fund the highway system. We feel like the minerals and oil and gas industry have a huge impact on the highways in the state of Wyoming, and see that that's a fair way to take a look at how to fund the highway system. So that's certainly something we'll be taking a look at as well when that draft comes out, to take a position on that later before the session.
Okay, questions for Ms. First?
Mr. Chairman, just to kind of answer the question that
Yes,
Mr. Corthell had, fuel tax increases affect Ifta. When a fuel tax increases is proposed, it goes across the board. It's for entire fuel, and that fuel is computed at the Ifta level as well. So the fuel tax increase would be computed into the Ifta program.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other questions? Okay, so I just want to be clear. Your board at this point would support 2 cents a year over 3 years, correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public testimony? Anyone else? With that, I'll close public testimony. Okay, and as I said, committee, we will carry this forward, table it for now, carry it into November so we can compare the two proposals. Will not go forward with both. We'll only go forward with one, I think, is a way to look at it. We're not going to go for severance tax and fuel tax and who knows what else. So that would be my concept unless the committee disagrees. Okay, with that, Ms. Jarvis, oversized, overweight vehicles.
Mr. Chairman, this is Bill Draft 22 LSO 0038 version 0.5.
Okay.
This bill draft is oversized and overweight vehicles, fees and permits. And as the title on page 1 describes, it is to increase the permit fees for oversized and overweight vehicles and also providing for an annual fee adjustment. So page 1 just goes on to describe the sections of law that are going to be changed. And the first section is 31-18-201, which refers to commercial vehicles registration, commercial vehicles and registration. So if you go to page 2, in subsection S, this is referring to commercial vehicles as far as, this is an alternate fee that commercial vehicles that if they're making a single trip within or without of Wyoming, this is they're an overweight fee. So what this fee has done using the cost of living increase calculator, Chairman Burkhart, he had information about when these fees were last increased, and the cost of living increase adjustment calculator, you can put the year in and then the amount, and then see what it would be based on just a cost of living increase for today. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Ms.
Mr.
Jarvis,
Chairman.
I'll interrupt you briefly. And that's based on the U.S. Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics calculator.
There we go.
I mean, there are a number of them out there, but that was one. It's available. It's used nationally. So that's what these are based on.
So for example, on page 2, line 11, you'll see that fee of $20 for, and I do not have the date that it was last increased, but when that 20 was last implemented, increasing it to current cost of living based on the Department of Labor calculator would be to $38.50. And as far as for a single unit at $40 on line 13, that cost of living increase would become $76.50. Then down on line 20, the cost of $7 for the temporary permit would increase to $13. And at the very top of page 3, the amount that was for a single unit that was $15 would increase to $25.50. Moving along to section 31-18-502, the decal fee for an oversized overweight, for the International Fuel Tax Agreement and Multi-State Highway Transportation Agreement. This is the Ifta decal that when people just use the acronym Ifta, that's what that actually stands for, is International Fuel Tax Agreement. Was at the rate of $10, and then this percentage increase goes up to 19. That's at line 13. And then we move to on page 4, where we're talking about the permits for certain highways for the vehicles, and those costs, those amounts are in middle of page 4. So they went from 15 to 26.50 and from 50 to $88. That was in lines 10 to 13. And Mr. Chairman, I'm focusing on just what the changes of the bill are rather than what each of these types of fees are. These are all different fees for oversized and overweight vehicles. But if the committee has questions on what they are, I can look.
Ms. Jarvis, if
delve
you
deeper.
go through the changes in the bill and that,
Okay.
I can take care of the rest of that.
Okay, great. So then at the bottom of page 4, there is the this is an additional one of the oversized overweight fees that goes from $15 to $26.50. And that took us to page 5, and there's a permit fee that was $50 that changes to $88. And then moving at the bottom of page 5, you'll see that we're moving into vehicles without load or invisible load requirement, for this category of oversized overweight vehicle. And its amounts actually are, once we turn the page over to page 6, that was at $50 and increases to $99.50. Then as we move forward about the fee for a permit, for these are for trailers, as we're moving through that paragraph, that subsection, went from $250 to $413.50 for the percentage increase. And then at in subsection F, starting at line 22, for an oversized single trip permit is issued for a particular vehicle, it went from $25 to $32.50. And that brings us to the top of page 7. And then in addition, for every there's an incremental rate that is added on for this particular type of permit, where that was at 3 cents but is now 3 9/10 cents for each foot or fraction thereof that is that traveled on the highways. And then on page 7 at subsection G, there was a fee of 6 cents that increases to 7 7/10% for each ton or fraction thereof of weight that is in excess over the limits of the oversized overweight limits. And then then also there's a minimum fee of, in no event shall the fee be less than what was $40, but now is $51.50. And so those are all of the fee increases that were just plugged into the calculator according to when they were last changed. And then moving on to page 8, there's a new subsection W that's added. And this is the part back on the title that said providing for an annual fee adjustment. And what this allows is for after these fees are put in place for the first year. And then this says, okay, the next year and annually thereafter, the department, and that means the Department of Transportation, shall adjust the fees in this section for inflation by using the Consumer Price Index or its successor index of the United States Department of Labor. That is the calculator that was used for these fees. Bureau of Labor Statistics for the calendar year that was immediately preceding the date of the adjustment. And the percent increase or decrease, it may be rounded to the nearest 50 cents. And they will go, and then it says when they will go into effect.
Ms. Jarvis, thank you. And committee, I'll walk you through the rest of this bill. This bill came before House Transportation last session. It did not proceed. We had to make some changes, which bills were going to go forward, which weren't. We were running out of time. So it sat. That bill was a little different than this one. The way I calculated this really was from that calculator we've mentioned. And some of these fees have not been raised since 1993. We're coming up on 30 years. All this does is brings the fees up to current market, I guess you could say. And that's why there are some odd numbers in there. There was no great rounding up. I mean, you get something like $38.50 or something, and that's the reason based on the last time that they were increased. The mileage fees, that's why the hundredths of a cent number in there. And that's the logic for them. Looking at these, it brings us in line with a number of other states. One thing I do want to mention, we had talked about the last committee meeting when we said go forward with the concept that we would look at annual permits. The department is already looking at those permits, currently has the ability to do annual permits, and is looking at coordinating that with other states and how we do it. And these fees, the more you get into them, the more complex it is. I have the book. There's the book on how you handle the fees and the permits. So I don't know, what is it, 100 pages or more? So it was merely to raise the fee. It was merely to raise the fees to what they should be right now. It was not to make more money. It was to bring the department and its expenses for these up to what current inflation is. And to give you an example of some of these loads, and some of you have seen the load, I did. There was a load, actually two that I know of, proceeded through Wyoming. Total weight, 2.1 million pounds on our highways. They could only move it at night because they had to block both lanes of every 2-lane road they were on. So that's some of the size of the loads that we're looking at. And that was the logic for the bill. It doesn't take in all of the fees. We'll hear about the rest of those later, but it does address oversized, overweight loads. And the department still has the ability and will still do annual fees. They're working on a computer system to do that. And with that, I'll answer any questions you might have.
Chairman.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, just a question with regard to, and we may hear on the presentation on the YDOT fees, but do we have other circumstances in these statutes where we have that we provide the opportunity for the department to do those inflationary adjustments on their own? That's one piece of the bill that that is a little bit different than what we normally do, is it not?
Chairman Landon, yes, it is different. And I don't think the Department of Transportation currently has that ability on any of the other fees. However, there are a number of sections of statute that do give other agencies the ability to raise those fees to adjust for inflation and increases. And I found several of them in my research. So yeah, it's not uncommon, but currently YDOT does not have that ability to adjust all the fees. And I've heard it said, well, we want to keep that within the purview of the legislature, and that's fine, as long as the legislature is willing to look at all of this every year or every 2 years even. Because to go back to 1993 on a fee, that, like I said, that's almost 30 years. So I think we just need to keep them even. And that's the whole concept of this bill, not to add additional money. So
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Representative Stiver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question I have is the Ifta fees. What if they don't have that sticker? How is that calculated?
The Representative, I have to spark my memory here. The reason that's included, the main reason is that one of these sections refers back to that section. So to coordinate between sections, that fee had to be increased. And if they don't have a sticker, then they pay the tax. It's an apportioned tax, so if they buy fuel in Nebraska, come through Wyoming, it's all calculated out in the end. But other than that, they have to pay for the fuel tax. That's why most trucks do get it. Questions? Okay. None? Okay, public, I'll open public comment, testimony.
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Again, Sheila Furch with the Wyoming Trucking Association. You've heard testimony before when you took up the original bill in the House. We have concerns. We continue to have concerns. I do have a handful of members here today that would like to visit with you about that. And I think what I'd like to do is answer Representative Stiver's question and then bring up those members a couple at a time so that they can talk to you a little bit about. They're the ones that use these permits. They're the ones that use these permits in other states. And I think that helps keep it in perspective on what we're proposing to do and how it compares to other states. But Representative Stiver, there are two programs for carriers to use, the IRP, which is for registration, and Ifta, which is for fuel. Most carriers do Ifta and IRP because it's just easier. If they're crossing state lines, it's just easier to do a quarterly report. If they're only crossing a state line 1 or 2 times a year, then they probably do trip permits and fuel permits. And those are addressed in that first portion in paragraph S. That's what those are. So you're talking just every carrier that does a trip permit or a fuel permit, then there would be the additional oversized overweight permits. So that extra decal fee for Ifta would probably not apply. I've not read that completely now that you bring that up. That Ifta decal fee would probably not apply to a carrier that isn't registered through Ifta. But I can tell you that most of the carriers that are doing oversized overweight vehicles are crossing several state lines, and so they are participating in Ifta and IRP.
Other questions? Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We talk about funding our highways, and the discussion often revolves around usage versus damage. So could you refresh my memory? One passenger vehicle does the damage of, or one commercial vehicle, 150,000 pound commercial vehicle does the damage of how many passenger vehicles?
Ms. Firth.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Baker, that figure is extremely fluid. Right now, the industry, the latest information that has been published as far as studies that's been recognized shows that as one commercial vehicle versus about 4,000 passenger cars. But there have been studies since then that are now saying that is so subjective because it's based on differences in axles, differences in weights on axles, as well as the quality of the pavement and the weather where the pavement is being used. So it's very subjective. One of the most recent studies shows it's closer to 200 to 300 passenger vehicles.
Other questions? Ms. First, why don't you bring up your members who wish to speak?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I'd appreciate a couple of them coming up at a time. I'll just hang loose up here.
Okay. Don't everybody rush up at once.
Mr. Chairman.
Please identify yourself for the record.
Shane Swilling, Knife River Corporation.
Okay.
Committee, Mr. Chairman, I'm mainly here to speak in opposition of the very last part of this proposed bill having to do with the adjustment based on the inflationary rate. Obviously, this year so far, it's 5.4%, I think is what we've seen. That's a pretty remarkable price increase to look at from year to year. In our specific, what we do, a lot of this is bid and a lot of it is for the state of Wyoming. I can imagine the dismay of the state if we were to inflate our costs and pass it on to you every year after you had gotten an initial bid. I agree, it's been 30 years since some of these have gone up, and it is time. But that's my main opposition, and on behalf of the company is just that it's hard to plan for that.
Okay, so Questions for Mr. Schilling?
I've got one.
Senator.
So, thank you, Mr. Chilling, for being here. Appreciate it. When you go to a job site, for example, take off from Natrona County and you got a job down in Uinta, do you have to permit everything that you're hauling down there? How does that work in your industry? I'm just curious.
Mr. Schilling?
Chairman, in what we do, a lot of what we do is divisible load. So with the exception of a Class W permit, which we can get for the 2-lane highways, we're not allowed to be overweight. Primarily, it's our equipment when we haul it that's overweight. In that case, it's not divisible. We have to, permit that. And now with some of the counties starting to pass on costs and county roads too, it's actually Converse County, for instance, it's necessary for us to get multiple permits for the move because we're having to buy one through the county, one through the state, et cetera.
So on certain county roads, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, just to
Please.
follow up, on certain county roads, say here in Carbon County, there's an overweight charge on the county roads as well. I was not aware of that.
I can't speak to Carbon County. I haven't looked at it. I know that Albany County is proposing one. Converse County currently has a system in place and they.
Oh, Converse. Thank you.
Yes.
I apologize.
And they do charge. It's a complex issue because in our case, we have mines or pits off county roads. And so now they're charging us on roads that we actually already have bonded as well.
Yeah, thanks for that information. Appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions? Mr. Schilling, about how much total do you think Knife River pays in Wyoming? Because I know you work in other states, a year in permits, in oversized, overweight load permits, just a round ballpark figure if you can.
Most of ours are self-issuing because we know the weights of our loads and everything, and we issue them to ourselves. Round ballpark, I'd have to say around 25 to 50,000 annually.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Schilling? Okay. Next, if you'd identify yourself, you can stay there for a while, Mr. Schilling. You can keep the rest of them company.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity. I'm Jim Morgan. I have a small company in Casper called JW Morgan Trucking. And I just like to address the fee increase. I have a bill for my last 30 days. I can share this with the representatives. We did 25 loads. This bill's $1,000. These are mostly small loads, just basic freight that's oversized. This increase, I know it's modest. I know they started with trying to double these fees. They've come back to just a modest increase, but that would be roughly about another $175 for this month. Times 12 months, that adds up. And this is something I have to pay out of pocket up front. We pass this on to our customers, but I have to pay these fees right out in front, along with pilot cars, out-of-state fees. This is something we have to pay. Something I'd like the legislators to consider. I know probably after the first of the year, we're going to go to the online permitting system. That will probably require credit card fees. Most states, they issue those permits immediately. You have to pay a fee right there to process that. That's going to add, like Colorado, that's $4 per permit. That's in 25 permits, that's another $100 that we have to pay. And that's something that, we need to consider going forward. With this online permitting system, there's a lot of us that use self-issuing permits, and they are talking about doing away with that. We would encourage, the DOT to keep the self-issuing. I know in my case, I would probably only use self-issuing like 10% of the time. But when you do an online permit, you have to put in all the dimensions, weights, all of that up front and buy that permit. Problem is, you get out on a location and this thing's got a piece of pipe sticking out it or something. Your dimensions are off. You get stopped. And if your permit's not exact, you're pretty much out of service. That permit's void and you're out of luck. Self-issuing, when you get out there, you measure it, you write in the amounts. You'll stop at a scale, you write in your weights, you get everything accurate. There's a lot of loads, you know, I have a lot of fiberglass buildings, 10-foot wide, be real easy to do online permitting and no problem. But when we pick stuff up out in the field, blowing it when we don't know exact measurements, that changes everything. So we would encourage to keep the self-issuing. Like I said, it would probably be less, use a lot less, but it does give us an option as far as, you know, ability to stay legal. Also, the county fees, I live in Casper, we do a lot of stuff in Douglas, we deal with Commerce County. I could take a load out, you know, 75 miles from Casper and have to double my permit fees because of Commerce County mirrors the state of Wyoming, which means they could increase their fees as well as the state of Wyoming. And so that doubles our cost. What I would like to see us do as a state is when we go to this online permitting system, right now, there's a lot of counties that do not receive any funds for oversized, overweight loads. But if we put a system in, which would be easy to do online, that say your load originates in Laramie County, your destination's Natrona County. If you're on county roads, you check a box, maybe you add $5 to each end of that, and the county receives the fees. If you don't go into any county roads, you don't check any box. A lot of times you're going state highways or private roads and you're not on county. But that would keep every county from trying to implement their own system, which I know is costly, and it's a real pain for us to have to double up everything that we do just to get a permit. And so with that, that's kind of all I had to say.
Any questions for Mr. Morgan?
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, are you aware of any other counties that charge weight and size restriction fees besides Converse?
Mr. Morgan, please.
Yes, I think that there's other counties looking into it. Maybe Carbon County, Laramie County has talked about it. And even some like Cheyenne, the city of Cheyenne, I think was looking into that. But as far as I know, Commerce County is the only one. And we see this like in Colorado, like only Weld County is one that we have to deal with down there. But it's the same thing. Going to Colorado and you go into Weld County, you have to do a Colorado permit and a Weld County permit.
Okay. Other questions for Mr. Morgan? Okay. Thank you. Okay. Do you have a couple more, please? And I hope we're not making that seat too hot for anybody. No, we appreciate you being here and all of you, and we appreciate the testimony. Please, if you'd identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to talk today. My name is Matt Otterby, the operations manager for Oftedal Construction in Casper. We do primarily local hauling in Casper or in Wyoming, unlike other companies that do more interstate. You'd ask Mr. Schilling the question about how much they spend annually on permits. I looked into ours, and over the last 3 years, we've spent just shy of $250,000 on oversized, overweight permits just in Wyoming alone. So that puts us about $80,000 a year. Obviously, a 20% increase in that, 25, whatever we're looking at here, is going to be pretty significant. Even the 5% for inflation, or 5.4 that you alluded to earlier, is over $4,000 a year increase in permit fees. Obviously, I understand that prices need to increase over time. We all know how inflation works. Things do need to increase. Making up for a 30-year gap, and that's a pretty tough one to swallow. Obviously, in what we do, we're earth movers. We do a lot of work for the Wyoming Department of Transportation. Those costs are simply going to be passed down to the Wyoming Department of Transportation, the same people that are increasing the fees. So kind of a wash there for them. You know, when you compare these to other states, we do a lot of trucking in Montana, South Dakota, Utah, Idaho. Just looking at comparisons to some of the stuff we do in Montana, obviously it's hard to compare apples to apples. They're about an eighth of what we are in Wyoming. Utah's about a quarter of what we pay in Wyoming. Idaho's right around a third of what we pay in Wyoming. Those are, pretty good guesses is what they are when you try to compare apples to apples as close as you can. It's pretty significant. We already have high oversized, overweight fees here in Wyoming. I guess, when we're talking about increasing these fees, doing away with self-issuing permits, things to that nature, in my opinion, the more expensive and the harder you make it to get these permits, simply it's going to be the less people doing them. It's no secret that there's people out there that simply don't get permits. They run at night, they run on weekends, they do things they shouldn't have. We take a lot of pride in doing things properly, at least to the best of our abilities. I'm not saying we don't make a mistake every now and then, but we try not to bypass the law. We try to do it right. And we're going to pay these fees. If they increase, we're stuck. We're going to do that. Not going to be real excited about it, but we're going to do it regardless. Like I said, I think the harder you make it to get these and the more expensive they are, you're going to get more people not doing it. And I don't know if that's a win in the long run. I've always thought maybe something more appropriate would be the penalty on the side if you're not following the rules. If you go through a scale, you don't have the proper permits. If you get pulled over for an inspection, you don't have the proper items. That's where things need to get serious, in my opinion. You talked a little bit earlier about an annual permit. I think that's excellent. I love the idea of an annual permit. One of my reasons for that is Colorado, for instance, does an annual permit. I think it's up to 200,000 pounds. It's $400, which isn't a lot of money. When we do even one load to Colorado for our company, we get an annual permit. It's easy. It's going to cover us for the next year, whether we use it or not. Chances are we may not. You're going to sell a lot of those annual permits if you go that direction. A lot of companies are going to get them. You're going to get whatever the fee may be, even if it's double that 400 what Colorado chooses. It's a great deal. You're gonna sell, like I said, you're gonna sell a lot of those permits for people that may even just use them once. They may not use them at all. They're just going to get them so they have them in place because it's a convenience, and that's the biggest thing, is making this stuff convenient and easy to get. I know it's been proposed to do away with self-issue permits. Mr. Morgan really alluded to the self-issue permits. That's also a wonderful thing. Electronic permits are good, but when you do that, you're basically putting everything on either a dispatcher in an office to obtain those electronic permits, or the drivers themselves sitting in the cab of a truck, which you can all understand is a pretty difficult thing to do, especially in Wyoming, where you don't have exactly the best phone service in a lot of areas. Getting away with self-issue permits is going to make things really tough. And that just takes me right back to where, when you make it tough, there's just going to be people that aren't going to do it. So I would really like to see the self-issue permit stay in place. I think it's a great system. I think it works very well right now. And would really be disappointed if that went away.
Mr. Otterby, I hate to interrupt you, but I don't see anything in this bill that addresses the self-issuing permit issue. It isn't addressed in the bill. It's merely the amount of the cost of the permit.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I got off topic there a little bit. It was my understanding that going to electronic permitting, which I know is a different subject, I just wanted to make my opinion known that if we do go to the electronic permits.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Otterby? Okay. Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
Please again identify yourself for the record for this issue.
Yes, Mark Corthell with Corthell Transportation. You made a lot of points that I was going to talk about, so I'm going to switch just a little bit to focus on some things that may not be on the forefront of everybody's mind while we go into this. And one of them is the fact that just a little background, and we do is the opposite of what these three gentlemen here do. Is we do work in Wyoming, but it's mostly just through the state because we do coast to coast and north and south and everything. So there's actually 3 points I want to make. First one is that while I appreciate that the rate hasn't increased in 30 years, we already started as the highest state in the nation for permits. So for not to be an increase and then just increase the cost of living it doesn't address the fact that when you go from coast to coast or north to south, when you go through Wyoming, you will pay the most for a permit, especially an overweight permit. Some of those other ones that are in the legal weight and that, then they're pretty in line with the rest of the states. But the overweight calculation gets to the top of the list very quickly, the way that it's calculated in Wyoming. The gold book is extremely hard to go in there and figure out that process. So when we have to quote jobs and quote our permits, we make our best guesstimation and then argue with our customers about whether it's going to be that high because they've never seen permits that high. So it really becomes a bit of a problem. So how I can understand the increase due to inflation, but our base starting point was already far too high in those categories. Okay, second of all, Representative Baker asked a question about the damage to the road. And the calculation of the car versus truck. And we need to verify something here. And that is that what we're really talking about is two kinds of trucks here, because you have all the trucks that they're not over 80,000 pounds. They're not over legal weight, and they go through the state by the hundreds of thousands. Okay. And those axle weights are maxed out at axle weight per axle. They run 5 axles, and those axles are maxed out at their 20,000 pound axle weight most of the time that they go across the state. Now we take an oversized load that has multi-axle. So instead of 5 axles, we'll have 8 axles, 9 axles, 10 axles, 12 axles, whatever it is. And however, we have all of those axles, and we're charged from 80,000 pounds up. Most of our axle weights are significantly less than all of those other trucks. Like over all of my oversized loads, probably only 20% of them run at max weight. Everything else will be, instead of a 20,000 pound axle, will be a 15,000 pound axle. Now I know that there's a bridge calculation and all that kind of stuff in there, but I don't think there's any accounting for that. And then when you take that, what was asked about the 204,000 cars, and then a new study, the 250 cars. Well, there's no study that is the difference between those trucks and the damage that they cause and the oversized overweight trucks and what they cause, which really could be even less, because number one, we have a less volume of them, and number two, they're running a less axle weight because we have the expense of putting more axles on the road. I think that, and it's my understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the oversized overweight fees have a specific allocation in the transportation funding in Wyoming. And whatever that is, we've been trying to maintain whatever the cost of that is with the fees allotted to it. And I think that we've reached a point maybe where that system is broken and it can't level out, and raising the fees is not necessarily going to achieve ultimately what we're trying to do, which is fund whatever it is that this is allotted to. So we may need to go back and figure out a way to fund this allocation, not from these fees. I mean, they can help and continue or whatever, but there might not be a way to use these fees specifically for this allocation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Crusoe. Any questions for Mr. Crusoe? Questions? Okay, thank you. Julie, you have anyone else?
I think that's it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Unless there's someone online.
No one online? Okay. Director, Colonel, either of you care to speak on this issue, on the bill? Don't come to a meeting you weren't invited to. If you say no, that's an acceptable answer. Okay. Mr. Chairman.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought I would take the microphone because this technically is a bill that was developed and brought to the committee by the good chairman. So let's discuss maybe what we want to do with this bill, even before I ask for what your pleasure and emotion. What's the sentiment? Anybody have anything? What is the pleasure of the committee on this bill?
I'll move the bill.
Moved by Representative Baker. Is there a second? Is it Senator Furphy, seconded? Discussion. Representative Overmuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to comment as much as anything, we have a problem with the way we deal with fees that get this old. It's like anybody that's based in a fee-based business. You can't, like, I was in the accounting business for 40 years. You can't have accounting fees set 1 year and then 30 years later go to your client and say, I think I need an increase. For fees, they need to happen on a regular, small basis over time. And just as a policy within the state on all fees, somehow we have to get to a systematic, regular way of increasing these fees so we don't lock ourselves into this kind of problem. And Mr. Chairman, a second comment, we heard that the basis is high to begin with, and that's a really good point. And so that's the part of it that I would like to understand more about, I believe, is that if my fee 30 years ago was what it should be now, then there's no justification for an increase based on inflation. The fee's too high it was too high to begin with. So it's just adjusting downward to where it should be. So I'm real confused about the numbers and how these fees relate. The testimony was pretty compelling from the guys that actually deal in this environment today. I think, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Representative, not to jump in front of anybody else, but just to pick up on where you left off, I just found myself thinking about the fact that it's really on us that we haven't adjusted fees in 30 years. So why would we turn around and punish private business for our feelings? So that's, with great respect to the chairman, I found the testimony very compelling today as well, and appreciate the effort to bring the bill but boy, I really appreciated some of our businesses coming today and telling us what's really going on. Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, one thing about fees is when you try to compare them with fees elsewhere, you really need to take the whole picture of what we as Wyoming citizens pay, because we may be low in one area where other states will generate their revenue in different areas that we don't tax, right? So you kind of have to look at the whole picture. And so, yeah, maybe they were high to begin with, but we're very low in other places. And so, it's pretty difficult to necessarily look at one particular fee and say it was too high to begin with, when lots of stuff was too low to begin with. And so, it's very difficult, as you said. So I just wanted to make that one point.
Okay, thank you, Senator.
Mr. Chairman? Go ahead.
I'm going to go to a couple and then we'll come back to you, Mr. Chairman, to bring it all the way home. But Senator Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, what was testified today is compelling, but I live in Laramie and I see the increased traffic on I-80. It's almost amazing and almost unbearable to drive on the interstate right now. And so we've got to pay for those highways. They're beating up our highways, all this truck traffic. And so I think we've got to raise these fees, and I'm sorry we penalize some of our local companies, but I think we've got to raise these fees to take care of our highways. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Baker, did you have something?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the discussion also today. I appreciate the honesty from the contractors in acknowledging that at some level, people just disobey the law and break the law. That's a real concern that I have because I think it's much more common than we actually think that it is. Particularly probably more common with our smaller carriers than the larger carriers because larger carriers aren't going to want to risk that. But I do appreciate the honesty with that because I think there's a lot of validity in that. But I also feel that, you know, just touching on the inflation part, I think there's some concern there. I don't necessarily think that we need to index that and adjust it every year. But, you know, a concern that I have with trying to put this off on enforcement and maybe those loads that are running illegally anyway is, you know, we've got our state troopers and in our district, I think we're missing 30% of our troopers. So how do we put that burden back on our troopers to enforce these overweight loads when they're, you know, overburdened already? So I do think that there is some validity in looking at raising these fees, even if the amounts that were to adjust for the inflation maybe not be the right amounts, but I think we need to consider adjusting them.
Okay, thank you, Representative. Let's go to a couple more representatives, Mr. Chairman, and then I'll come back to you. Let's go to Representative Stiver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason we have an increase on I-80 is I-70's been closed because of the mudslides in Lidwin Canyon. I've been down there. But I'm holding a permit right here for an individual for what, from June 23rd to June 27th. And he paid $55 to drive on I-25 to go to Casper, hauling a great big load and back. That's why I was asking about the Ifta stickers. Paid $15 in special fuel tax. That was it. I'm not, you know, the evidence, the gentleman that spoke are very compelling. I'm not for this. I think we need to start looking somewhere else. Thank you.
Representative Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, everybody, for showing up and giving your testimony. And I think we look at, you know, as a whole, when we're not in the industry, we look at these large oversized vehicles as causing more damage. But when we hear about the testimony on how oversized vehicles add more axles, it decreases the amount of damage that particular vehicle does because the weight is distributed over a long amount of time. The other testimony we heard is that, you know, we're looking at increasing these fees in order to put the money back in the coffers to help pay for the roads. But yet we also know that the drivers are going to turn around and just basically bill the state back for what we're charging and try to raise the fees. When we look at a couple of articles throughout the news media here in the past couple of weeks, that Wyoming itself, the economy hasn't rebound as the rest of the state because the industry themselves is kind of lacking with such a small state, and we just don't have the economy to bring it back in. So we're not rebounding as a state, but we're expecting the small businesses to try to fill the gaps in what we're missing out. A lot of people don't know an average net profit for a trucking companies, we're anywhere between 2 to 6% profit margin. And that's not a lot of money to work when you start looking at trying to raise fees across the board. Possibly November, we might be looking at a fuel tax. So I mean, you got that increased fees. With all due respect to Chairman Burkhart, I'm a no on this one. Looking at if the fees were too high 30 years ago and we're getting down to where we're at now, or where we should be at comparable to anywhere else in the country, I don't think raising those for inflation would put us in competitive line with the rest of the country. I think it'll just keep putting us high. So there's a lot of factors out there I think are are concerning for me right now with where we are at as a state, and where our small businesses are trying to get back on their feet, trying to rebuild from 2020. And I don't think this is going to help them as a whole.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Representative. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And last time, I think we had some compelling testimony from Taylor Rossetti as an expert with regard to fees and things. So maybe if the bill moves on, we can get hear that again. But I would encourage the committee to continue with this bill. And I personally will be going back. I've got at least one constituent that I know of in my district that does not fall into a segment where he can easily self-permit. And I know that it's always been an issue for that particular constituent. And maybe as somewhat of a give back, maybe if the department can continue with, as technology changes, maybe change the way that some of these permits are handled and make it so that it's more convenient well, I would use the word convenient, more convenient for the industry. Maybe that would be a good benefit as we continue to consider this. And certainly, as Representative Overmuller pointed out, we need to have fees that are current and comparable with our neighboring states. And as the good senator pointed out, sometimes we give here and take there. And so we need to find out again. I believe that there was some pretty specific testimony last time we looked at this as to how other states collect different fees in order to the overall cost of operating a trucking operation. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Further comment? Let's go to the good chairman. Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the committee, I turned over chairmanship to the good co-chairman on this because I didn't feel it was appropriate for me to chair the discussion. So that's why the little bit of change. A couple of those issues. When we considered this bill last session in committee, there was testimony and data given that indicated the amounts suggested at that time were actually going to be in line with most other states. And now all of a sudden they're going to be higher than everybody else's. This is not an easy calculation. You heard reference to the gold book, which I have here. That tells you how to calculate these fees. It's not just you're overweight, so you pay a fee. There's a lot of calculation in there. I don't think any of us were here 30 years ago to say the fees were too high then. I don't even know what the consideration was. Okay, we have one person.
I was here 30 years ago.
And so his opinion is the fees were too high then. So when you compare us with other states, it's difficult unless you're going to compare an exact load in Wyoming going through Utah, Nebraska, Colorado, anywhere else. And for example, Colorado has some of the lowest fuel taxes around, but if you go to the gas station, some of the highest prices of fuel because of the way they fund their highways, which is different. So I don't think you can really compare each state to each other and say one's so much out of line than the other. Some of these loads take a considerable amount of trooper time, a considerable amount of escort time, a considerable use of the highways. I think all of us have had to sit behind oversized loads. There's a disruption to our flow of traffic. And all I'm asking is that they pay a fair share, bring it up to current costs. If you buy a new Peterbilt today, I can guarantee you it's a lot more expensive than it was 30 years ago. It's a lot more expensive than it was 2 years ago. And we need to keep our fees in line with what's going on in the real world. I appreciate Mr. Otterby not threatening to leave the state. Thank you. We've had that. If you raise the fees, I'm going to leave. Come on, let's get realistic about this. So I understand those concerns. We can't address the county issues. They're doing things on their own. We don't preempt counties on fees on state roads. Well, we do on state roads, but not the county roads. So that's the only thing this does. It brings the fees as they existed. Some of them, as I said, almost 30 years ago, some a little newer, up to current costs. Whatever we buy costs, and the customer pays these. I had a load shipped in from New York. I paid all of the freight on that load, and it came truck freight. Hardest thing was finding a way to unload it. I don't have a dock. So that's who pays those fees. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will call for the question.
So Heather or Katie, Amanda, somebody, would you please take roll on this proposed bill?
Is this to move it forward, Mr. Chairman, or is this the actual voting on the?
This
is for committee sponsored bill.
This is for a committee sponsorship of this bill, and we will vote on it now, Representative Baker, in that regard, whether to move this forward to the legislature or to not pass. So go ahead, Representative Baker.
Well, Mr. Chairman, are we going to work the bill at all? Because it's much more amenable to me without that last section.
My mistake. Thank you, Representative Baker. It's a good thing you're here to catch me. Let's do work the bill. Let's go through page by page as we did yesterday. And again, we're working 38, working draft point 5, page 1. Committee, anything on page 1? Page 2. Is there anything on page 2? Page 3. Over to page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. Representative Baker.
Thank you for the process. I would move to delete all the new language on page 8, lines 1 through 9.
Okay, seconded by Representative Henderson. Does everyone understand the motion? Discussion. Heather.
Mr. Chairman, if it's amenable to Representative Baker, I would also perhaps recommend on page 1, line 2 and line 3, deleting providing for an annual fee adjustment.
Thank you, Heather. I think that is conforming, and I'm sure that Representative is good with that, and the second as well. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No?
No.
Let's see a show of hands. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand.
They were pretty loud.
Okay, all those opposed. That motion passes. We are back on the bill.
Hold on.
8-7 was the vote. If I counted correctly.
We eliminated that.
We do have 15 members, correct? Thank you very much. Okay, we're back on the bill. Anything further? Any further
Mr.
amendments?
Chairman? I'm so sorry, there's 14 members.
14?
And so I don't know. I'm not,
So
doesn't matter to me which way it goes. I just don't know that my count was the same as yours.
I am a journalism major and not a math major, so thank you for clarification. I voted with the amendment. Let's get a show of hands again, okay? Let's back up. We'll do it again. All those in favor of eliminating the language on page 8, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right here.
Mr. Chairman, you're in favor.
I am voting to eliminate the language. Okay, so that's 8. All right. Now, all those opposed, please raise your hand. 8.6, not 8.7. Thank you, Heather. So that language has been stricken by the passage of that motion. We are back on the bill. Is there any other suggested amendments or changes to the bill? Okay.
Question.
Heather, would you please take the roll on this bill?
Mr. Chairman, this is roll call vote for committee sponsorship of 22 LSO 0038, oversized and overweight vehicles, fees and permits as amended. Senator Anderson?
No.
Senator Furphy?
Aye.
Senator McEwen?
No.
Senator Pappas?
Aye.
Representative Baker?
Aye.
Representative Brown?
Aye.
Representative Burt?
No.
Representative Henderson?
Aye.
Representative McGuire?
Aye.
Representative Obermueller?
No.
Representative O'Hearn?
Aye.
Representative Stivar?
No.
Co-Chairman Burkhart?
Aye.
Co-Chairman Landon?
No.
Six noes.
Mr. Chairman, that bill passes. There are 8 to 6.
Okay, thank you. I think that bill probably better start on the Senate side. So that will be a Senate bill, Heather. Okay, thank you, committee. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Question? Okay. All right, so that puts us, I don't know, we aren't on that schedule anymore. So committee, thank you for the very good discussion on that bill. Very much appreciated. So the next topic under there is possible letter to the congressional delegation to inform about some transportation project priorities, request assistance with federal grants. I guess I'm unclear, Ms. Jarvis, what we did there. What we were looking for, or was this a request from a committee member?
Mr. Chairman, at the May meeting, Representative Henderson and the committee discussed the possibility of such a letter. It was following the priorities that YDOT had expressed, and it was possibly calling out to some of these priorities to the state. Or the idea would be to identify some of these priorities to the state and to request that the congressional delegation would assist and advocate for the state of Wyoming, particularly for any funds that could be directed towards it, particularly for any funds that did not have match requirements. And it was left somewhat open, but it fits this funding topic as to whether the committee wanted to do it, as to whether Representative Henderson and I were supposed to work with YDOT or not. It was somewhat an open, unfinished topic for May.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Jarvis. So Representative Henderson, refresh our memory, especially in light of the infrastructure bill and the ARPA funds and that sort of thing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we all know that there's a number of dynamics involved here, a lot of things going on, and some things that we won't see decisions on for some time. We have a really good congressional delegation, and I know there's a lot of active dialogue ongoing. But I think it underscores, by taking a little time to have the chairman with the input from the committee and others to dial in, if you will, on some of these key points and opportunities regarding leveraging how all these pieces go together. If you think about it, if we have all these millions of dollars coming into our state, well, then there might be a building counter rationale for fewer dollars in other ways for other things that are going on in our state. And I think we need to be prepared for that, recognize it with both eyes open. I think with the wisdom and experience of the chairman and all the things that have happened over the last couple of years, it'd be good to help our congressional delegation know with words in a letter how we think maybe there are some opportunities that we want them to have their intention invite their attention to. That's basically the census of that.
Committee, any discussion, any questions for Representative Henderson? Senator Anderson. Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman, I think that the congressional delegation has staff in state that are working on that very issue all the time. I think it's a good idea that we should put out something. Maybe it's from individual legislators, though, maybe not from the committee, but they are looking for that information all the time in the local offices. So that would be good to get it to them. Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And maybe we want to go to Representative Henderson first and then, offer a comment.
Just real quick. In my first term, I attended a meeting where we had the opportunity to listen to our congressional delegation. And I'm paraphrasing, but the gist of it is that they welcome examples from us on areas of interest that we see that they maybe could help us with. And I recognize that there are other avenues open and available, but this would signal support of one of the key committees in a very critical area to our state in the areas of transportation, infrastructure, and, safety overall. Forest, wildfires were mentioned earlier. It doesn't have to be a long letter.
So,
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, just to, I tend to agree with Senator Anderson on this. I don't think it hurts a thing. I appreciate the sentiment shared by the representative, and you and I could certainly get with the director of WYDOT and our staff and come up with some communication that supports what they're doing back there, and anything further that could happen, we'd sure appreciate it. Mentioned some of the deficits that we're dealing with. That's my thought. I'm glad to try to do it if you are.
Mr. Co-Chairman, I see no harm in doing a letter. However, I go back to some of the comments the congressional delegation has made to the body over the years, which is if you want something, you need something, just call us and tell us. One of them actually said, please don't send me any resolutions. They don't really mean anything. So, their input to us has been, what good Senator Anderson said, get with them and let them know. I mean, I call them on occasion with certain issues and call their staffers, but I have no problem doing a letter saying we have issues with our infrastructure here and that. I don't know. What's the rest of the committee think? I don't know that we need to put it to a vote, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, maybe let's do a little homework, and we're not going to hurt anything if we wait till November to make this decision. Let's take it under advisement. That'll give us an opportunity to visit with our department a little bit further, and with all that has happened since May with this infrastructure bill and et cetera, that's kind of changed the outlook just a little bit. So, maybe you and I can take that under advisement and maybe not pull that trigger right away, but I
Good
think
advice,
it has
Mr.
some merit.
Co-Chairman.
Okay.
Yeah. So that wraps up that one, and we are now only an hour behind and 5 minutes. So I will give the committee a choice or not. Do you want to try for a quick lunch, or do you just want to go hungry and keep moving?
Keep moving.
Keep moving.
Keep moving.
Okay. The rest of you who didn't speak up, well, go hungry.
Mr. Chairman, you didn't bring any donuts, did you?
Nope.
Okay, I was just checking.
Oh my gosh.
I found an Oreo.
Amy has something.
Ms. Legursky?
Association and the Contractors Association would be happy to order stuff, and all the dealers feel they're happy to order a pizza and they'll pick it up and bring it.
That's gonna be fantastic.
Sounds pretty healthy. What am I doing?
Does anyone want lunch brought in?
Yes, that'd be wonderful.
That'd be, if it's more appropriate, I think that'd be-
I will pitch in for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's more appropriate.
Because we are.
Yeah. Okay.
We really
Let's
appreciate
take
that
a-
gesture.
Okay,
Katie, but the committee may do that and you can certainly do it as well, but I think committee, it would be more appropriate if we want to get some pizzas, let's get them.
Director, if you could hold off while we take a 5-minute break and we'll get this straightened out. You can just sit there or order your own pizza or whatever.
Mr. Chairman, we'll be ready in 5 minutes. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
And hopefully, Mr.
I don't know what YDOT did. They're healthy. Maybe they don't eat. But we've got some pizzas coming in for the committee. When they get here, we'll take a few minute break to eat. But until then, in the interest of time and everybody's schedules, why don't we get started? And we're gonna do a review of the YDOT fees. I think we've already addressed all those overweight, oversized load fees, but if you wish to make some comments now on those, that's fine. So
Thank
with
you,
that-
thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Luke Reiner, Director YDOT, with me, Taylor Rossetti, head of our services department, and Mr. Dennis Byrne, our chief financial officer. I tell you, we did submit per your request a list of the fees. And I think really, Mr. Chairman, they speak for themselves. We can just walk through here and I'll certainly give the floor to my counterparts here to make any comments they wish. The first one that we handed out was the YDOT commercial vehicle fees. Mr. Chairman, you're correct. That's the one that was included in the bills and I think have been specifically addressed unless there's some questions from you to us on those fees.
Any questions for the director on the overweight, oversized load fees? Okay, Director, continue.
Mr. Chairman,
then
seeing
with the
none,
others.
then we'll move to the fuel tax fees and which is on the next list. And Mr. Chairman, that certainly is pending in a bill. And unless there's specific questions to us, I'd recommend we move on.
Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next one then is YDOT driver services fees. And I'd like to really pass the microphone to Mr. Rossetti to make his comment.
Mr. Rossetti.
Mr. Chairman, Taylor Rossetti Support Services, YDOT. Those fees, as the director has mentioned, are pretty self-explanatory. These are the statutorily set fees, along with the time and the date of the last change of those fees. I would like to point out to the committee and the folks that are following this that underneath Wyoming Statute 317113G, the bottom fee that's there for the driver's license with limited privileges, those numbers are transposed. The current fee should be 55 and the last amount should be 50. That does account for the technology fee that was implemented for the TIS system from last season. I apologize for that mistake in the materials. Moving on to the second page of these, this is really the only area where, as we've worked with staff and are working through things, and they observe what goes on in their operations. These are a couple of areas that staff have come to us and maybe made suggestions to us that we should consider possibly looking into fees. Most of these things are for material that we provide no cost, and it's at no cost even if somebody copies of these items. So for example, like the driving knowledge test, first one makes sense to be free, right? It's a requirement, but if people come in repeatedly, it does take up time, makes it less efficient for others. If the legislature saw fit to make a fee recommendation there, we would certainly work with you guys to do that. That's really all I had to say for this section of those fees.
Mr. Chairman, if there's no questions on that category of fees, we'll move to the next area, which is the motor vehicle fees. And again, we'll pass the microphone back to Mr. Rossetti.
Mr. Chairman, nothing additional to say here other than what's before you. As with the previous discussion on the overweight, oversized fees, some of these are a little bit long in the tooth as far as the last time they were adjusted. But again, we're providing this information for you guys. It's really a policy decision as to whether or not action needs to be taken.
Mr. Chairman, that really is a list of all the current fees that we're involved with. I think Mr. Rossetti makes a good point. And you also made it relative to the overweight, oversized, the many of these has not been adjusted for many years. And you have that data in front of you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, we'll stand for any questions you might have.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, gentlemen, I'm looking, sorry to not be honed in on this, but going back to testimony we received earlier from Mr. Moline, and also from conversations I've had with a fellow senator in this regard, where are the trailer fees that have been referenced today? Are they on this list and I'm just missing them?
Mr. Rossetti?
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Landon. So the actual commercial registration fees, we're talking commercial trailers, that actually should be part of the commercial. If it's not on here, I can provide some information to that effect for the committee. Let me look back.
So
I don't think he was talking commercial.
Yeah.
I believe maybe that the reference was to commercial trailers. On the other hand, we have a lot of ranchers and farmers and rural folks out there who utilize multiple trailers. And I have heard that from my constituents. And the good senator from the north part of the Bighorn Basin had intention to maybe visit with us today. I've encouraged him to, to get with you gentlemen and then come back in November. So there may, just so that I just wanted the committee alerted, Mr. Chairman, that there's potential for us to take a look at a couple of these. So,
Mr. Chairman and Co-Chairman Landon, if we're talking about the commercial trailers that are considered commercial trailers that are registered basically as part of a combination with a tractor trailer, there is no state fee associated with those. That fee is collected at the time that the combination is registered. The vehicle is registered at the maximum weight of the combination, and then the trailers basically only pay the county portion of the fee. So that information is actually not on this because there's not a state fee associated with that.
thank you. I will keep an ear and an eye to the ground, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
So, Mr. Rossetti, so you just confused me. I apologize. So if I have, say, 5 tractors, but I want 10 trailers because I can keep one of them loaded and switch loads and all of that. So the 5 extra trailers I have, how do I get a license plate for them?
Mr. Chairman, those are registered at the county and they follow the same fee that the county structure is for vehicles. It's the depreciation schedule over the 6 years, just like everything else, based off the factory value of that trailer.
Okay, so there is no state fee for those trailers?
No.
Because, Mr. Rossetti, I hear that we don't have many trailers licensed in Wyoming because our fees are so high.
Mr. Chairman, again, the way that the fees are calculated on vehicle registrations, the largest portion of those fees are the county portions of the fees. So those fees are actually that way. You could have a $40,000 trailer in that first year of service. That county fee may be $800. But there is not an additional state fee on that because again, that state fee is counted into the gross combined weight when that tractor is registered.
Thank you.
So, Chairman, one more quick question.
Senator Landon.
Thank you. And I appreciate the list, gentlemen, really helpful. So has there been any discussion, Director, with regard to some of these fees and how we might expedite, not just for our constituents and public out there, but for those who are working in your service offices? It just seems like maybe there's some opportunity for some of these fees to not, for our folks not to have to come in every single year and come in person. You know what I'm saying? Maybe get a 3-year registration on something instead of 1. And have you talked about that? Is there any room in this list for that sort of thing? What can we do for our constituents?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Director.
I'll tell you that to the best of my knowledge, we really have not talked that. I'm not sure that we would be opposed to it. I think, if you want to pay 3 years at a time, I in terms of an efficiency, I don't, off the top of my head, wouldn't think that's a bad thing. I have to see if Mr. Rossetti has a comment on that.
Mr. Rossetti?
Mr. Chairman, currently the way that the law is worded, I believe the maximum length you could go is 23 months. So again, that's a statutory restriction that's sitting there in the existing statutes.
Mr. Chairman, that might be something we want to look at in the coming year.
Okay.
Any opportunity that we
All right.
could create for lessening the imposition on our
Yes.
people.
Okay. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and something that we might want to consider, especially because there are statutory restrictions against it. Some of our neighboring states have lifetime licenses for small trailers, individually owned trailers. And maybe we look at something like that as a convenience factor for our constituents. So.
Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, as we look at this, one of the things that I'm not seeing on here, and maybe I don't know, but are all of these, every fee that you guys raise go to the highway fund? Or do these have different areas that they're going to correct certain, functions or whatever within YDOT? We don't have to go through each individual one. I'm just kind of curious.
Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dennis Byrne, Chief Financial Officer with YDOT. To answer your question, these all do go into the highway fund. These are things that do go into the highway fund.
Okay. Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I don't see the University of Wyoming plates on here. I was thinking that we brought in quite a bit of money from the University of Wyoming plates, but maybe it's under miscellaneous motor vehicle fees. Embossed license plates, I don't know. The other question is, why don't some of these have 2020 revenue on them? Like the house trailers and other trailers, and school buses don't have any revenue in 2020. I have done that extension on my trailers for 23 months, and that's fine. I would like to see it extended longer on those little trailers that it's not much money. It's awful nice to have 23 months of tags on that. And it'd be nicer to have 36 or 48 months of tags on that. So a couple questions.
Mr. Byrne.
And Mr. Chairman, I can certainly take one of those questions. The question is, why wasn't there revenue associated with some of these line items? If you look at the document, and specifically you were talking about the house trailers, if you look at the top of that section, that colored section, it's a cumulative amount of 37 million. That accounts for all of those fees within that section. I am on motor vehicle fees on page 1 of 2. The reason we do that, Mr. Chairman, is pretty straightforward. It's kind of an accounting function, and it's based on our revenue code. So we accumulate all of those things based on a singular revenue code.
Okay.
Okay.
Then the UW plates, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Yes, Senator. Director? Or Mr. Rossetti?
Mr.
Byrne,
Chairman,
one
I'll
of
need
you?
to pass that to Mr. Rossetti.
Where is it? W plates.
Who gets the mic?
This is interesting.
Mr. Chairman, so I'm going to speak, and then Mr.
Mr.
Rossetti is
Byrne,
going
please.
to correct me, but I'm pretty sure they're in here within one of the line items as it has to do with the place. I'm just not seeing it right off the top here. So maybe Taylor can help. Let's just take a look. And we can certainly get back to you.
Mr. Rossetti.
Mr. Chairman, sorry about that. I was trying to get a sample of some registration calculations that I think will help this discussion a little bit for the committee. The fee that comes to us off the University of Wyoming license plate is basically that fee that's down there, 31,3,102, which is those, well, let's see. It's the $30 fee that comes to us basically for the specialty plates. So the rest of that revenue on the University of Wyoming plate, if you recall, actually goes to the university as a scholarship fee. So that's not included here again as well. It's just the specialty plate fee is $30, and that is included on here.
Representative Obermuller, I think you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I answered my own question. Thanks.
Okay. Was there another question from? That's fine. Okay, other questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Director, please.
If now is a good time, we did have, just knowing this question would come up on trailers, it is complex. And I actually had to have Mr. Rossetti give me a class on how that worked. And so based on that class, we really presented, we have a handout that we would be happy to just walk you through in terms of how that revenue works. It will be relative to the discussion for the good senator from the northern part of the state, and we could hold it until then if you wish.
Director, why don't you go ahead and have that discussion now? And that's, you're talking about the handout that we just received.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So this is just sort of a handout that sort of explains kind of how the registration works and breaks it up to the county and the state fees. These are just representative examples. They don't necessarily mean anything about a certain car or vehicle or anything like that. It just shows you how the formulas work. So the first one there is the passenger car. Again, that one's pretty straightforward. The state fee is $30 as prescribed by law. The county fee then is, 20 or 60% or 3% of 60% of the factory price in the first year, and then it drops from there. Pickup truck example is very similar. Again, that fee is higher because it starts with a higher factory value, as well as it is the state fee for that particular vehicle is based on that vehicle's published weight. So that's how that fee varies. I think the thing that's actually probably more pertinent to this discussion is actually there on page 2. And there's a couple of examples here of commercial vehicles and the differences in how those vehicles, while they may look the same, can actually have very different registrations. So in the top example there, you have a commercial vehicle that's not a combination unit. So it is registered on its gross weight, basically. And in this instance, I picked a vehicle with that particular factory price and that particular gross vehicle weight rating. So that's how the fees are calculated for that vehicle. Again, the state fee is calculated based off of the gross vehicle weight, and the county fee is factored off of the value. Where it starts to get a little different is the example that's down there on number 3. And this gets to, I believe, both of your questions, Mr. Chairman. This is a commercial vehicle that's being registered as a tractor trailer combination. And this vehicle will be registered at the gross combined vehicle rating for that vehicle. So that changes the way it goes. So in this instance, the state is getting their portion of the trailer fee included in the combination. So in this instance, we're getting the county fee based off the vehicle factory price, and then the state fee based off the combined weight of that tractor when it is pulling the trailer. Moving then on to number 3, page 3, that's again where we have this question about the cost of registering and the annual registration for these commercial trailers. Those commercial trailers are registered at the county based on the depreciation schedule. And you'll notice that there's no state fee associated with them when they're registered in that manner. I further go on there on page 3 just to show you a small utility trailer, because these are very common as well. And there's some confusion. These actually go into the weight table that the trucks and the other non-cars go into. So that's why I gave you this example here. So that was hopefully helpful to explain that. And then I think the other issue that occasionally comes up, right, is the cost to register a motorhome and some of the issues we have with people going to states maybe to the north of us that don't have, sales tax and maybe lower vehicle registrations. This particular motorhome actually had a factory price when I looked it up at $2.2 million. And that was the weight according to the curb weight from the manufacturer. So that first year of registration for that particular vehicle is going to be $40,381.94. But again, that's simply applying the rules and the statutes that are sitting there in existence today. So with that, I'd certainly stand for any questions you may have on the handout.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of friends that have purchased these motorhomes. And their point is that that's a factory price, but nobody pays the factory price. But the way we have it set up, it's based on the price, not what they paid. And so we have a little problem there in that they may be licensed at one time in Wyoming, but that was the end of that. They blame the state on that, which your chart shows we're not to blame for that. It's the county that's to blame for that. Is there anything we can do, because those motorhomes are being licensed in Oregon and Montana and Arizona and all kinds of states to get away from that county fee?
Mr. Rossetti?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Anderson, I'm probably going to skirt up right to the edge of where I'm can maybe be an expert, according to Representative McGuire. I don't know that the county nor the state is to blame. Again, this is the tax structure that we have chosen. The county portion of these fees are really an ad valorem tax, much like a property tax. So those taxes are generally based on the value of the item, and the value is, in this instance, has been determined by statute to be the factory determined value for that, not the actual price the individual pays. To change that for a particular class of vehicles could potentially be problematic. I'm not an attorney. I'm certainly not a tax attorney. And to change that across the broad spectrum would drastically change the way the counties receive revenue from this particular source.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Brown.
Thank you. And just to follow up on that, I think what Senator Anderson's saying is that the cost is so exorbitant, we see people leaving. And we do that based off of the factory price and not the sales price. The reason we don't do it off sales price, and this is after having multiple discussions, and I've been trying to hit this as best I can with my county treasurer and former Senator State Treasurer Kurt Meyer over the past couple of years. We don't use the sales price because then when you go to do that, people will write a bill of sale for $15 for a $35,000 vehicle. No, yeah. So we have to use something that's objective. And that's the only thing that at the time that this was put into place, my county treasurer was there. And when it was put into place, this is the only objective use that we can find. Looking at how we can solve this, I've been up and down this path multiple times, and it's just, I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's a really, really convoluted mess.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator
follow up on
Anderson.
that. And you're right. We've been working on it for some time. I've had two bills that neither one of them went anywhere to relieve people when they've got a motor home that's 20 to 30 years old. I had a constituent in Casper that was going to buy one and actually live in it. And it was like 30 years old and she paid like $5,000 for it. Went down to the treasurer and they valued it at the factory price. And of course that killed her idea of living in it. So there must be some way we could do that. We tried to do it on the number of years if it was 20 or 30 years old, but we never got anywhere with that either. But they're worthless at 30 years old, and yet we're still charging factory price. So problem to work on.
Senator Pappas, you look anxious.
If it's that old, we'll put an antique plate on it for a one time.
$10.
Other,
Mr. Chairman,
other
just-
questions?
Well, they
Senator Landon.
They want to park it, but there isn't an antique plate for that.
Just one other comment
good idea.
to the committee as we catch up and try to make this as informative and educational these 2 days as possible. You'll notice what the state fees are as compared to the county fees on all of these vehicles. And it really begins to stand out when you look at, trailers and even the motor homes and things. Look at the motor home. And here we are trying to take care of thousands of miles of state highways and such, and that's the fees we get at the state level. So just pointing that out. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Rossetti, or well, any of the three of you, any idea how many of these large, call them super motor homes are actually licensed in Wyoming? Rough guess is fine.
Mr. Chairman, I'd be uncomfortable making a rough guess, but I could see within the database if we could pull that and I could provide that to the committee.
No, don't make that effort. That was a curiosity question. I don't think it'd have any great use. So my next question would be, looking at all the other fees back on that subject, do you feel any of these need to be increased at this time, considering there's one on here from 1979?
Mr. Chairman, to your specific question, certainly as an agency, we would not be opposed as we work through the budget issues of seeing increased fees.
Okay. All right, we're just discussing on ourselves what we might want to do or not want to do. So any other questions on fees? I hope this was useful information. I find that the length of time between these fees to me is ridiculous, but that's our fault. It's not the department's fault. It's not the director's fault. It's on us that we aren't keeping track of these. But then again, we have fees in other agencies also we don't keep track of. Okay. While we wait for lunch, why don't we go to the next topic, Director?
Hey, good idea.
Public comment on
If there isn't. Well, yes, okay, you're correct. Thank you. Before we move on, is there any public comment on YDOT fees? Anybody in the room? Anybody in virtual land?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, with that, I'll close public comment then, and then we're done. Okay, next topic is YDOT employment issues matters. And
we were saying over here, it does matter.
Yeah. Okay, so Director, I don't have any handout material, so I guess this is more information sharing than anything else.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, yes, thank you. Really, I think your request to us was, really a quick update on employment matters within YDOT. And certainly, I think that you heard a lot of the issues yesterday as we were out and about from the men and women that actually work boots on the ground. And I think I just summarize this to say is, when I talk to individuals about YDOT and about where we're at as an agency that's authorized 2,000-ish men and women, I think our actual number is 2,044, is my biggest concern today is with employees in terms of them being a state asset and in terms of our ability to recruit, retain a quality workforce. And as it's not just YDOT, it's statewide. And I would compliment HRD, which is a portion of A&I, for standing up a work group to start working some of those issues. And we do have several members from YDOT sitting on that committee, specifically Mr. Rossetti and our head HRD rep now, Catherine, Castaneda, who sits on that. And so that's sort of where we're at, at the state level of working some of these issues. The focus, if I was going to say, hey, here's where to focus, the focus is really, our recommendation is on compensation in terms of, a compensation package and not to get too specific, but my recommendation always is got to look at the amount we pay. And then the next issue there is a stepped and really periodic raise, because really what you hear from employees when you sit down and talk to them is the amount of years between raises. And really what happens for us is, because there's so much time between raises, is we often get pay inversion and pay inequity, so that somebody who comes on board, after me makes more than me based on the timing of the hire. And that really creates a sense of inequity within the force. And so as you look at compensation packages, certainly those are recommendations that we would make to look at. And that has been shared with HRD, and they understand that. And I believe that Ms. Williams was intending to attend today. We're ahead of schedule, so she may join us here in a little bit. So that's some thoughts on that compensation plan. I think what I'd share with you there is that what you heard yesterday is an example that we hear often, is our members, specifically in some of the high turnover areas, going to work for either private industry or other governmental agencies for increased pay and less responsibility. And the example that you heard yesterday, really from this county, was a foreman going from one of our shops in terms of, he was a maintainer, snowplow driver, to the county. He received a $5 increase, in pay immediately. And I believe he had a promise of $1 raise, per hour for the next, I think, 5 years. He was not in charge of anybody, and he was off of I-80. And so and we pay those guys about $20 an hour. He was getting about $20 an hour. Entry is about $17.32. And so that's a 25% increase in pay. And that's a significant amount of pay. And so while we work to retain him, I cannot blame individuals for taking opportunities that are presented to them like that. Oftentimes you hear, well, there's the state has great benefits, and so that compensates. In the case of the guys going to the county, really the retirement and the other benefits are the same in terms of healthcare. And so that argument is not always exactly correct. I always do think in terms of our ability to recruit and then to train as our employees are on board, and to care for them over the long term, knowing that they provide a service to the state. Because as a state, we rely on our state employees to provide the services that we do to the public sector. And certainly in WYDOT, our focus is customer service. Everything we do relates to customer service, whether it's having a well-maintained road, or a push to talk button on your Wirelink radio that works, or going to the friendly, customer service, our driver services people in when you go get a license. Same thing on the trooper side. I would share with you on troopers is that we have also lost now. We are now losing troopers to other law enforcement agencies, again, based on compensation. And of concern to me is, and Colonel Howell is welcome to join me, is that we're now losing midterm. Initially it was pretty much entry level, but now we're starting to see midterm professionals who really we anticipate staying with us for a career starting to leave. And you sit and talk to them, it's about compensation. So let me just.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Anderson.
Could some of those patrolmen be between Casper and Rollins? Just asking for a friend.
Director? Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, the colonel of the Highway Patrol would know that better than I, but I suspect no. So I think the other thing I'd share, and then I would just stand for questions, because we could talk this all day, and I like to just talk in generalities here a little bit, and we talked a little bit last session. There is, as you look at the life cycle of an employee and the product that you expect at the end of a career versus the beginning of a career, the professional development of our employees is really key. And when you're training, the next colonel of the Highway Patrol or the next chief engineer, the experiences that they get throughout their career set the conditions for their ability to serve in those higher positions. And every time, you change and go up in responsibility, it's another opportunity to get seasoned in what's required to do that job. And my concern right now, as I look at the force, is that we have many people opting not to take the next step in terms of levels of responsibility. based on two things. One, the pay compression is pretty tough. And two, and we talked about it last session, this inability for us currently to pay moving expenses and to help encourage them to say, hi, I really do need you to move from Casper to Gillette or to Evanston and move around the state to get that further development position. For those of you not on my bus yesterday, we sort of talked about progression within the engineer ranks. And you go from, a project engineer to a residential engineer to, a district, maybe a maintenance engineer or construction engineer. And then you become, a district engineer. And then you become, assistant chief engineer, and then you become the chief engineer. But what we're seeing is people who have the ability to perform at that next higher level, unwilling to make the move. And we're starting to see, I think, mismatches in skill set based on that. And I think the long-term negative effects on the professionalism that you expect from your employment, at some point they'll manifest themselves. And it's, taking a long view of the most critical asset we have, which is our human capital. Mr. Chairman, let me see if Colonel Haller has something to add, and then I think we can stand for whatever questions you might have.
Colonel Haller?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Kevin Haller with the Highway Patrol. I mean, we have a saying at YDOT, and this is Director Reiner's mission, and that is one YDOT. And so I certainly echo everything that he said. Just to give you an example, though, as troopers, as one class of employee, but as well as dispatchers and port of entry officers, we have so many classes within YDOT where this is an issue. Specific to examples to troopers, currently we are down 29, and that number is quickly growing. This does affect our ability to meet the expected level of service throughout the state. We're talking about longer response time to calls. Oftentimes, these are medical emergencies. It's a job that our troopers are trained for, and they take very serious. I would also add that we have put a significant amount of time once we bring somebody on board and we put them through our academy process. Our troopers are the most trained law enforcement officer in your state, significantly most trained. And that is for a number of reasons. And one factor involved in that is because they all work so independently. They are generally out there alone at night under unforeseen circumstances. And so I will just leave that there. With that, we are losing troopers, as Director Reiner indicated, to local agencies. Sometimes these are very small local agencies. Just as an example, Pine Bluffs Police Department, just 30 miles east of Cheyenne, starts out at $25 an hour. So in working with HRD, we are looking at different things, and as the former Hay study and market rates, that comes to just at about MPP, which is the median pay, which would make us more competitive. But again, as Mr. Director, or as Director Reiner indicated, geez.
I am Mr. Director.
Yeah, Mr. Director. Indicated, the problem doesn't stop there. It is something consistent. Our employees are waning. They have been told we're working on it. And as a good friend of mine and the longest standing, most decorated trooper in our force put it, actions speak louder than words, sir. And so they are waning, and we are going to lose more. On top of this concern, we also have a 13% retirement rate in the next year. So our problem just continues to roll upward and forward. And we do have 6 recruits in our academy class right now. We're not treading water. We are going under. And I am very concerned about the level of service that we are going to be able to provide public safety for our travelers, as well as back up our partners in local and county law enforcement throughout the state. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for questions.
Any questions for Colonel Haller or Director?
Mr. Chairman,
Oh,
if I
I'm
could
sorry.
maybe add one thing just before we go on.
Yes.
Is what Colonel Haller says about level of services is true across the board. So, and you heard it yesterday from our district engineer in terms of really trying to cross-level crews. You know, the numbers right now is we're authorized 2,044 positions and we're down below 200. And what you heard yesterday from Mr. Tarango is positions open for 6 months and 2 applicants. And the applicant's not really being qualified to fill the position. And again, really, as we tell is there's competition everywhere, and the wages that we can offer are not attractive. So with that, Mr. Chairman, we'll stand for questions.
Representative Baker, I think you had a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just, I want to take a second too and just let everybody know that I think since our last meeting, I went on a ride along with our local highway patrol in our district and Lieutenant Russell there, and we discussed a lot of these things. And one of the things he said to me is that after speaking with one of the troopers that left that district, he said that trooper said, you know, you can't take pride to the grocery store. So, you know, I mean, they all, you know, they want to be able to do their job. They take pride in doing their job, but, you know, they can't buy their groceries and pay their mortgage with that. I'm actually very sensitive to this because living on Interstate 80, when you're down 3 troopers and you're supposed to have 10, you know, you're down 30%, and that's a lot of shifts that aren't covered. So a lot of times speaking with the trooper, you have 1 trooper on the road. You don't have the 2 that you're supposed to have. That's even more scary, even more, you know, reason that I think that we should really consider, you know, I understand Y.1, but increasing our troopers specifically, in my opinion, I think it's very important when we look at the safety and I would also encourage everybody here, if you haven't taken the opportunity, ride along with the trooper and speak with them about some of their needs. You can really get the boots on the ground feeling. We talked about body cameras. We talked about, you know, real threats and the concerns that they have, whether or not, you know, being shot, some of the real, where that plays in on the psyche of some of these things. But my question is this, is that understanding that the legislature really only appropriates a portion of the budget and the commission really appropriates a lot of Y.'s budget. What do you offer as suggestions with Y.1 taking a bite at this apple? Because if we want to be successful going to our colleagues and the members of Appropriations Committee, I don't know that we're going to be successful in a you know, making Y.' whole. So what first bite could we take?
Director.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Baker. So one, appreciate you coming out on the drive along, ride along. Appreciate your assistance and liaison with the commission. And I tell you that one of the policy that we work under is that while we have 75% of our budget is controlled by the commission, we are state employees and fall under the state, you know, personnel rules. And so while we theoretically could use commission money for increases to portions of Y., the guidance has been, hey, we're going to treat everybody the same in terms of state employees. As a state, I think that's good policy. And so I think we need to tackle this at a state level and not specifically Y..
Other questions? Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I appreciate you guys bringing this forward. I don't think there's probably been a bigger champion of state employees in my time in the legislature than me trying to help out as best I can, giving raises, whatever the case may be. Really focused hard on that. My constituency is a very, very heavily populated public employee district. And it goes from state, county, city, school district, you name it. And one of the things that I hear on a regular basis is state employee, especially from state employees, is, hey, look, city and counties are getting raises all the time. Why aren't we getting a raise? You know, I'm making the same wages I was in 2011. But one of the other biggest concerns that I get from state employees, and I have a lot of YDOT employees, and I was not aware of this, is their concerns actually come from working environment. That they recognize that the state's broke. They recognize they get a good benefit. They recognize all these things that the state provides for them. But one of the hardest things that they deal with on a daily basis is work environment. And whether that's middle management, upper management, going up the food chain, it doesn't matter where it's at. So what type of directives have you done as the director and you as the colonel? Have you guys done to test internal policies and internal issues to work on employee morale, as opposed to only looking at, mainly what I'm seeing is a flat rate pay for the past 10 years. I get it. I worked for the state and I didn't see but one raise in the 8.5 years, 7.5 years that I was there. So what have you guys done internally to look at intrinsic values as opposed to always, focusing on these extrinsic values?
Director?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, hey, that's a good, fair question, because there's always two sides to a coin. And I'll tell you, as the director, we spent a lot of time in these last 2 years really trying to tackle some of those issues head on. And the way we did that was we took the employee satisfaction survey, which we do every 2 years. And we took the one from 2 years ago and we really peeled that thing apart and said, all right, how can we do this stuff better? And you sort of got to look yourself in the mirror and say, okay, let's tackle this. So some examples would be one of our initiatives has been, one of my initiatives has been is a, better transparent communication. And so we instigated a staff call. We sent out that we do every 2 weeks, and we send those staff call notes out to the field as in routine. Send out emails to the staff a lot. Every time we have a meeting, we send out notes per se on when we do executive level, basically our Monday morning meetings. And so that's an example there. As we looked at some of the issues with leadership, we said, the most critical leadership roles in my mind is first line leaders, right? Back in the military, that's sergeant level, right? That's where you make or break the organization. And as I looked at training requirements, leadership training wasn't required at that level. It is now. So if you're going to be a leader within YDOT, responsible for men and women, it's a requirement that you go to training for that next level. And so, Representative, those are examples of what we've done deliberately to improve the working environment of this state agency. Now, what's interesting is, and I'm not clear to release it yet, but we do those surveys every 2 months, every 2 years. And we just got the results, and we're still sort of peeling them apart. But what we've observed is an increase in the positive way on most of the questions that we asked. And so for me, that was a very heartening in terms of, hey, leadership matters. And, it starts from the top, but every level of leadership makes a difference. And there's only so much span of control that you've got. And so you got to address it at every level. And so what I'd share with you is that from my perspective, we've got the right policy changes and the right sort of cultural and leadership changes in place to help ameliorate what you're talking about.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman, please. Thank you for those specific examples. That helps a lot. One of the other things that I think, again, these are coming from friends. And so I have to be very careful when they come to me in confidence. And some of these good friends of mine, some of them may be in highway patrol, some may be in accounting, some of them may be out on the road doing plow driving. I've got friends all over the place that are coming to me and they tell me some of these things that they'll go to their supervisor and they'll say something to their supervisor and it goes in one ear and out the other, or they're retaliated against. And they're scared to death to open their mouths to anybody above them. Their supervisors shut them down, say, no, we don't take this here. We handle everything in-house. We don't take this up the chain. I'll take care of it. And those are the types of things that get me concerned. I don't think it's only YDOT. I'm not here to pick on you guys. I think this happens, all over the place. But what kind of open door policy? What type of opportunities do these employees have to come to you that they're in a position that they feel as if they're scared, that they're upset about something that's happening with their job, but they're scared to go to anybody else in leadership to try to get it corrected for fear of retaliation? It's spooky to me. So I'd like to know what YDOT is doing, because again, this is going intrinsically. Money is one thing, but my master's in public administration. I can tell you 70% of public employees don't go looking for money. They look for intrinsic values.
Yep. Director, any other
Mr.
questions?
Chairman, yep, Representative Brown, to that question. And it's a fair question. Couple things. One is, both Colonel Haller and I have open door policies, and they are used. And one of the very absolute realities is there is no retaliation. And part of the leader training that you put people through that now I told you is required, hey, that's all part of that training. And so that's one aspect. And so we always say, hey, you always have a right to come see me. And then you just got to deal with the issue. Now, understanding that sometimes people are worried to do that because it's a big organization, is what we've actually done to try and combat that and to ensure that employees have a voice is we've actually stood up what we call employee advisory teams. And so it's certainly a new concept to YDOT. I used it a lot in the military, but YDOT's so big and disparate that I actually stood up 3 of these teams. Each one has between about 10, maybe 10 to 12 individuals that were volunteers. And the teams have morphed a little bit, but they've absolutely been a wonderful way to get a sense for what's going on the ground, and for the ground to get a sense for what's going on at the state headquarters. And so it's helped with open comms a lot. And the other thing it's done is you sort of publish, what we talk about there, and then you publish the names of the individuals that are on the employee advisory teams for a couple of reasons. One is you want peers at those levels to go talk to the people on the teams. And what we've had happen, which is a good thing, is, hey, I got an issue with this. They tell their buddy on the EAT team, and it comes to me that way. And because I think as you sit in leadership roles, is you've got to ensure that there's a way for the lowest element of your organization to express concerns and have to be addressed. And so those employee advisory teams have been a really important tool for us to do that. And really now it's, people at first, the organization is pretty dubious. But now what you're saying is, hey, how do I get on that team? Because of, I think it's the ability to positively influence the organization. And because we've had significant policy changes based on input from those teams. And to the Colonel's point about actions speak louder than words, those are the actions that matter. And so I think there's good confidence in the organization that if you say something to Luke Reiner, that he'll pay attention and he'll listen. And it's not in one ear and out the other. And and so again, I go back to employee surveys and we share those and we'll share them, as soon as you work through all the details and the time is right, but it'll be yet this year. And so that's, I think, what I, ask you to pay attention to as it comes out and keep asking those hard questions about, hey, how are you doing as a leader? Because I think that's what you pay me to do. But as I look at the organization and I listen to the organization and you have a sense for where we're going, or I only sense a positive trajectory in the items that you discussed.
Thank you.
Director, thanks for that. You're absolutely right. I think this is an issue, and I'm talking to the committee as well. I think it's one that we could spend all afternoon on. Some real eye openers there. So I'm going to entertain one or two more questions and then we probably need to move on. So I'm going to go to Representative McGuire and then we'll try to get wrapped up on this topic so that we can move on. We've got lots of bills.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Heather Jarvis for some very good research on this. So currently, and this is directed more towards law enforcement. So currently our fines and penalties go to the school fund for the respective county in which the offense occurred. However, it looks like there are some additional fees that may be associated with that fine or penalty that can be directed in another direction. And I'd be curious to see how much money is actually going to the common school, or excuse me, to the school fund of different counties. And if there could be fees that maybe would be directed back more towards the agency that was responsible for enforcing those laws, as opposed to contributing. I understand what the original intent was, but maybe maybe those fees need to be going more towards the department as opposed to the school system. So be something to look into and some numbers that might be interesting to look at next meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Go ahead, Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think with that, we'll wrap this up. Lunch is here. We're going to take about 10, 15 minutes. Let's just say 15. So the committee can grab lunch. I see most of you managed to get yours early. So if we could do that, and then we'll resume with discussion of commercial drivers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for ordering in lunch for us, and we'll arm wrestle or square up or something.
Okay, I was under the understanding that some of the Senate were going to pass out from hunger, so.
So they're paying? Is it Senate's treat?
Heather.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if there's public comment, but I just didn't know.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for the reminder. Is there any public comment in the room? Is there any public comment virtually?
I don't believe so, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, with that, I'll close public comment. Now we will take.
Sorry, Director Bach from A&I, she is on.
Oh, okay. Good, good. Director, do you want to speak? Not, well, yeah, go ahead. You're here. Director Voss, please.
Good afternoon, and I'll be very quick. I just wanted to make sure, Chairman Burkhardt and members, that you were aware that the job workforce team is working diligently on this for this session to talk about pay as an enterprise issue, not necessarily individualized, but as an enterprise issue. Wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. Also that we have a current survey that's closing the end of this week on employee satisfaction. I think Representative Brown will be happy to see that as well. And that is going out to all employees coming back to A&I so we can evaluate those answers. And with regard to, and I'm trying to go quickly, with regard to some of the questions about satisfaction other than pay, I do think that the centralization of HR has made a significant change in that. We have seen a lot of folks who maybe had issues or wanted to bring some things to HR, but now that it is centralized, they feel a little bit better about that. Things are working well in that area. So I'm hopeful that Representative Brown, you'll see a little bit of a change in that there is an outlet for somebody to go to that maybe isn't within that chain, so they feel a little more comfortable. So we are working on that, but the jobs workforce policy group is something that's been in effect that is essentially run by Director Cooley from Workforce Services, along with the Human Resource Division Administrator, Aaron Williams. So we've been working diligently on the retaining employees and pay and kind of larger issues. So you will see that coming up in this session from an enterprise look. And I can stand for any questions if you have any.
Questions for Director Voss? So Director, I do have one, just in a general way. The results of your surveys and that, will they be available to the legislature even on a confidential basis?
And thank you very much, Chairman, members of the committee. We anticipate having that available generalized, like in pie graphs on our, for everybody, not just the executive branch. So you'll be able to go to A&I and see that on the dashboard. I do think we would be able to work with the legislature on drilling down a little bit if you would like to see that as well.
Okay, I think, Director, we may consider that for the next meeting, especially if you'd have specific data for YDOT and the military department.
Chairman Burkhart, we will not have it drilled down to individual agencies as we made it anonymous, because that seems to be the only way that we can get participation. And right now we have 2,800 responses, which is pretty good for only being out there for a week. If we did it and we were able to if we did not have it anonymous, we wouldn't have that kind of a result. However, we will be able to have more information on some of the comments that are made, and you could probably compare it with the YDOT survey and they would know that that's all YDOT. So we could kind of merge that together, and I can work with General Reiner as well, or Director Reiner. Thank you.
So Director, I think we'll wait and maybe by November you'll have information for us, and we may have you attend that November meeting and give us an update.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Director. Okay. Any other public comment? Okay. All right. With that, then I'll close public comment and we will recess until roughly 1:30.
Thank you.